Good evening. Welcome to the Ogden City Council meeting for May 1st, 2012. Let the roll call reflect that all council members are present, and we welcome all of you here tonight. We'll now have Vice Chair Blair lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
We'll now have a moment of silence. Thank you. Next on our agenda is a request from Hill Air Force Base. We'll have a presentation by Lieutenant Colonel Juris Jansen and Kevin Ireland regarding the upcoming Hill Air Force Base Air Show. Thank you.
Well, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Juris Jansen. Nice job with the pronunciation. Most people fail miserably on that one. But I'm out here from Hill Air Force Base. I am the 2012 Warriors Over the Wasatch Open House Coordinator. We have a great show this year. It'll be anchored by the Thunderbirds. They will be if you're not familiar, the premier aerial demonstration team. They'll be anchoring the show. We've also got a bunch of statics that are coming out, a variety of airplanes. I won't get too geek speak on them, but a lot of fun airplanes out there, as well as some military performers, and then warbirds. So some of the classic airplanes. Right now we're looking to get executive suite out there. So we call it an open house air show because it's a great opportunity. It exists for us to open the doors and let the community come out and see what we do. So I'm personally excited to get a chance for people to come see what we do on the base. We've decided to call it Warriors Over the Wasatch so that in the future, if you hear that term, that will always reference the air show, the open house there at Hill Air Force Base. The information is available at www.hill.af.mil, and there's where you can find a list of information about restricted items, show times, performers, the latest and greatest on the weather, that type of information. If you go to to that website and you look for the open house logo, Warriors Over the Wasatch, and click on that, you'll follow the link to all of the information that I just described. One of the things that we're asking this year is that we don't have people bring coolers. I want a foot stomp that just because we're saying no coolers, that doesn't mean we're saying don't bring food and don't bring water and that type of thing. You can, just no coolers, please. And there will be free water available to the public there as well. So that's one of the changes. In a moment, Kevin will get up here and talk to you about some of the things that the community is bringing to the air show because it's really been a great opportunity to work with you all. And those are essentially everything that I wanted to highlight. But do you have any questions for me?
How do we get a ride?
How do you get a ride?
Yeah.
I owe a couple of friends that answer first, and when I crack that code, I will get back to you on that one. So,
it's always been a nice program out there, and I'm sure it'll be the same this year. So
we are really excited. It's shaping up to be. I don't know if anybody made it out for 2009, but expect a similar type show. So, all right, and then Mr. Ireland had a few words.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. It's good to see all of you. What I'm here to talk to you about is what the community has done as far as the involvement with Hill Air Force Base Air Show. I've been the air show coordinator since 1995. And when we started that, it initially started out as a support structure to assist with the pilots and people coming into the base to help the Air Force Base as much as possible. This year, our extent of support is $300,000. Both through the state, local cities, municipalities, as well as private donors. We've raised $300,000 in support of the show to enhance what's out there for people to come out and see this free show and experience what aviation is really all about. Our portion of that is about bringing in the top performers in the world. We're bringing in Tim Weber from Geico. He's one of the top performers that do the flip-flop type stuff up in the air. Kirby Chambliss, who flies for Red Bull, 4-time international aerobatic champion and 3-time Red Bull Races champion. We've got the Red Eagles, which is a twin biplane team that flies in both formation and acrobatics. Dan Buchanan, who was Showman of the Year last year, who is a paraplegic and flies a glider, as well as the Red Bull jump team, a B-25 bomber, a P-51 Mustang, and many other World War II aircraft, as well as modern-day aircraft, including the F-22, will be out there, both as a static and as a flying ship. So we encourage you to come out with your families. It's a 2-day event, the 26th and 27th, over Memorial Weekend. Bring the families, bring your food, bring a chair, bring a hat, a little bit of sunscreen, and enjoy this. It's a unique opportunity. It is totally free for both admission and parking, and it only gets to be experienced every couple of years. So I would encourage you all to come out and partake of that. It's a huge thing. It's a great opportunity for the base to be able to show what they do. And as a representative of the Top of Utah Military Affairs Committee, it's an opportunity for us to show what our support is like for our military people. Any questions?
I just wanted to make one comment. We had a family trip planned that weekend, and we actually had to delay it because no one could miss this show.
Good for you. That's excellent.
It's a highlight.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to come talk to you. It is an important event. It's one of the largest events in the state of Utah. We expect over 500,000 people this year. And it's the second largest air show in the country. You should be proud of that. We're all part of that. And come out and enjoy yourselves. And have a really good Memorial Weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is common consent for a community day of prayer. We'll have a proposed joint proclamation declaring May 3rd, 2012 as a community day of prayer, and that will be read Thursday at 12:15 on the front of the municipal building. Stairway here. And we'll just take a vote to adopt.
I'll make a motion that we adopt that proclamation.
Second.
Second it.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Blair and a second from Councilmember Heyer to adopt the Community Day of Prayer proclamation. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next is approval of minutes, and this is the minutes of the study session of February 28th, 2012. Councilmember Stevens.
Yes, Mr. Chair, those minutes are correct, and I propose that we accept the minutes of February 28, 2012.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Stevens and a second from Vice Chair Blair to adopt these minutes of February 28th. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next is our public hearing, and this is the annual action plan. And Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Ward Ogden will be directing the conversation. And he's got plenty of backup players behind him, I think.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, the action plan is a part of what we call the consolidated plan. The consolidated plan is a 5-year plan for the use of the federal dollars that come to the city for community and economic development. This will be the 3rd year of our 5-year implementation. So 3 years ago, we instituted the 5-year plan, and we set out goals and objectives to meet over that 5-year period, and we're now moving forward with the 3rd year of that plan. The plan was developed and draft was provided to the council office on March 13th, and then on the 23rd of March, we started a 30-day public comment period where the public gets an opportunity to look at the plan and give comment. We also conducted a work session on the 27th of March where the council had an opportunity to hear that and receive some feedback and comments. Our public comment period ended on the 25th of April, and so here we are at the hearing to adopt the plan. And if the plan is adopted and the resolution signed, then we will submit this plan to HUD, and along with an application, it basically becomes the application for this money. And And that money will then become available in our line of credit starting July 1st. That's a little bit on the process. The content of the action plan involves a total budget of just over $4.2 million, and that comes from the Community Development Block Grant that comes to the city in the amount of $916,000, the Home Grant in the amount of $326,000, and then some other funds that the City Council has granted as match funds for the home program, which requires a match, and that comes from our housing fund. There's also some program income from the repayment of loans that we've issued over the years in the amount of $466,000, and then there's a significant amount of carryover funds from the prior year in the amount of $2.3 million, and that basically is $1.2 million of that is block grant. That's carried over for projects that we have anticipated over the years, namely public improvement projects and infill projects in the East Central neighborhood. There's also some carryover funds in the loan loss guarantee fund that it was approved by the council a few months ago, and that weren't all spent yet. And then there's a fairly significant sum, $440,000 in the SPG, the EDI. Again, SPG means Special Purpose Grant, and EDI means Economic Development Initiative Grant, that was received many years ago and have now come back to us as loan repayments. And we're using that fund, or recommending that that fund be used for basically initiate the new home exterior loan program. So you'll see that here in a few minutes. The objectives that we plan to meet with the plan are under the heading of improving the quality of housing. Under our asset control area program, 12 purchase and rehab homes. Under the emergency home repair program, 3 emergency home repairs at a minimum, and that could increase. And then 4 rental rehab units. We also expand homeownership opportunities by offering 45 loans to home buyers to purchase homes in the Owen-Ogden target area. Increasing the supply of decent, affordable housing by building 4 new infill houses and undergoing 1 new project by the Community Housing Development Organization, which receives a set-aside of funds from us under our home program. Under the homeless prevention initiatives, we support Weber County Homeless Charitable Trust. That was funded years ago, and now we're a partner on the board, and they initiate some funding for homeless programs in the county, and also supporting applications for outside funding for, not our funding, but outside funding for homeless and SRO type projects. Under the community development initiatives, the objectives that we're meeting there are to provide safe and to improve the safety and appearance of neighborhoods by undergoing 200 code enforcement actions, and that's a minimum, but there tends to be at least double that. And by also doing a public improvement project, which we will be doing in the East Central neighborhood. Under the economic development initiatives of job creation, 8 jobs is the goal through the small business loans. And through the new program that was initiated a few months ago, the loan loss guarantee program is anticipating 66 new jobs in this coming year. Through the BIC, we're anticipating 500 people to receive counseling and referral services there. The East Central Revitalization is a grouping of funds and programs designed to help revitalize the East Central neighborhood under a strategy that was adopted some time ago. And city funds that are not federal funds have been allocated, and there are $358,000 in that fund for unit reduction under the unit reduction program. And then, as I mentioned, the the $440,000 that would be used to fund the home exterior loan program, and we anticipate 28 loans for roofs, driveways, windows, exterior improvements on homes in the East Central neighborhood. As through the course of the process of doing the public improvement, excuse me, the public comment period, we received one comment, and that was a request for a letter of recommendation to help apply for some funding for an SRO type housing, single room occupancy that helps low income people. And so while we wouldn't fund that, we would support the application. And so that's been inserted into the plan. In addition, from the draft plan to the final version, we also insert the HUD forms. There's a number of forms that are required to be added to the document. One of those is the application for funding. It's a specific form that we use. That's a federal form. We also fill out some sheets that are basically a computer-generated sheet that outlines our goals that we've just talked about. So it's an additional, it's kind of a redundant version of these goals. And then there's a number of certifications where we certify that we're going to comply with federal rules as we administer these funds. So it's a certification that goes along with that. So as I've said, the next step in the process is to adopt the resolution and send the plan to HUD, and we anticipate no glitches or problems with getting our money in our line of credit by July. So
go back and kind of repeat what you were talking about, a program that you inserted, and I thought you said, was it single family or single?
Single room occupancy.
Who's requesting this?
That was the CARE group who are requesting an opportunity to apply for funding from an outside entity, and they would like some support. And so they simply said, wouldn't it be a good goal that we support this in our action plan and recommend some a letter of support for their project.
They wanted to put that in the East Central, is that what I understood also?
No, it's essentially the existing SRO project that they have on 25th Street. So they want to do some repairs and
but it doesn't include any funds from us. It's just,
no funds from us.
It's just requiring that we go along with the application.
That's
It's
right.
basically what you're saying. Okay.
Yes.
Or just back to a few of the other summary of citizen comments. Can you just explain to me what an ACA program target area is?
Yes. The ACA program is the Asset Control Area, and that's the program where the federal government, through HUD, insures mortgages. And when those go through foreclosure, that insurance buys the home from the bank. And so HUD basically becomes the owner of the home. And then we have an agreement with HUD that within that target area, we receive all of those HUD foreclosures. And we've just now received our new agreement. Just got updated. So we now have another 2-year period in which we will be receiving the HUD homes. It's determined based on eligibility of the area as well as our strategy for targeting the neighborhood. And that went along with our East Central revitalization strategy we chose because we can't take on everything in town. And so it was decided in 2005 that the area would be from Monroe to Harrison and from basically the East Central area from 30th, but it goes a little farther because it's based on census tract boundaries, so it kind of weaves a little bit, but it's pretty much that area. Other questions?
Questions for Mr. Ogden?
Thank you.
Okay. Since this is part of the public hearing, we'll now accept public input on the annual action plan for the period July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013.
My name is William Bryant. I live at 2632 Gramercy Avenue. And that's a HUD, I live at a HUD subsidized facility. It's through Page Management, Problems Anonymous Action Group. I support the idea of having a single room occupancy by cure. I think that's a good idea. We need there's a lot of homeless people in my area that I live around there, and they're wandering the streets all the time, and they go from house to house, just wherever they can stay, and it's hard for them to get residency because of the good landlord policy and because of some of the HUD regulations that states that you can only have visitors for 14 days a year and stuff like that. You can't take them into your home for longer than that. And there's just a lot of people that have their own private residences. They do take people in and let them stay there, but sometimes it can become a problem because they get large groups of people in these homes, and they create disturbances, and they're up late at night making noises, so definitely the homeless problem is a critical situation in our city. I see it. I would just like to see this charitable trust fund, this Weber County Charitable Trust Fund. What exactly is that? I'm not too familiar with that. For housing, whatever resources you can come up with to help not only the homeless but other groups. I'd like to quote something out of the Book of Mormon that talks about this situation that we're having in this city at the time. It says, "And thus in their prosperous circumstances, they did not send away those who were naked, or those who were hungry, or that were athirst, or that were sick, or that had not been nourished, and they did not set their hearts upon their riches. Therefore they were liberal to all, both old and young, both bond and free, both male and female, whether out of the church or in the church, having no respect to persons as to those who stood in need." And I believe that we need shelters. We need shelters for these people. We need facilities to take care of the crippled people. There's a lot of handicapped people that don't have any place to go, and they can't get into anything, and there's a long wait to get established, and there just needs to be some sort of focus attention brought to that situation and have it addressed some way. So that's my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan.
Any questions?
No, and we'll try to get an answer for you too, okay? Thank you.
Okay, my name's Virginia Hernandez Reza, and I'm a regular resident and citizen here in Ogden. And I'm very upset today. And I'm going to address my concerns to you, the City Council, and the mayor. He's not here, but I suppose this is his CAO, Mr. Johnson, who I know from way back. This is what really discourages me and disappoints me and the people I represent. You are our City Council people. You should know what this is all about, every detail, because you're going to vote on it. And I can probably ask any of you a lot of personal details that affect the community that this represents. And you probably don't know. And I know that as a fact. Just like the previous City Council, when the previous mayor was here. City Council people, they were basically in the dark what the community development brought before the citizens. We were in the dark, the people, so were they. I'm very disappointed that you, our City Council people, should know exactly what's in here. They know what's going on, because that's their job. But you are representing who we vote? Okay, that's what I'm saying on that part. I represent a people in Ogden. I was born here, in the inner city, all through central Ogden, but all through Ogden. We vote, and we're watching, and we're looking. We are the people nobody pays attention to. You just heard this man here. There are so many concerns and problems in Ogden. All I've been hearing lately, how, oh, these here and these rich places here, Weber State, wonderful. But what about the poor and disadvantaged there? What's happening to Ogden? And people are waking up. People who don't vote, people who want to be informed, we're waking up. What's happening here in Ogden, I love Ogden. This is our city just as much as it's yours, everybody here. New people here, we love Ogden. There's becoming a rich and a poor. We're not going to let that happen. What happens to the middle class? Now, to the Ogden City Development Department, too bad the mayor's not here. I know Mr. Johnson. He was there from 2005 and 2008. He knows me. He probably thinks I'm just a pain, but too bad. I am an activist, an organizer. I do it for the people, all colors, all economic development. I will not stay silent, and neither will our people. The Economic Development Department, these are all new people, thank heavens. So we're going to hopefully work with them. So far, they've been working really well with this. Mr. Bride, Mr. McCaughey, they've been very good to us, by listening to us at least. But I'm concerned about what's being passed in this consolidated loan. And I will contact all of you and the mayor from here on out. Haven't been really talking to the mayor, but that's what we will do. Thank you for your time. Forgive me if I seem upset, but that's just who I am. That's the people I represent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further comments?
I'd like to
Yeah, go ahead.
move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Van Huzer and a second from Councilmember Wicks to close the public hearing. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And next is to adopt or propose Resolution 2012-7 to adopt or not adopt the resolution.
Mr. Chair, can I suggest you have further discussion?
Sure.
Maybe answer questions that have been asked?
Mr. Ogden?
Question relative to the Weber County Homeless Charitable Trust. There was a fund established through a land issue when the city received the BDO originally. There was a homeless conveyance requirement, and that could have been done through cash or other means. And the way that the city chose to do that was to put a piece of land in place that when it sells, it would generate some cash. And so that's what happened. When it sold and the Boyer Corporation bought that piece of land, the proceeds went into a bank account. And the idea was to establish this homeless charitable trust to manage that money. And the idea was that it would earn interest over time. They would kind of watch it and manage that little fund. That at some point when it became big enough that they could, that there was some interest, they tried to keep the principal in place, and so the interest would be either given or loaned through a mechanism that the group would choose to do. And so that started, I believe, was it last year that they made their first allocation. I believe it went to St. Anne's. Oh, this fiscal year. So it went in this fiscal year, and it went to St. Anne's. So in the amount of, was it about 100,000? Okay. And that's about what the interest was. So.
Can you tell us who manages that? Is it Ogden City's responsibility, or is it the county's?
No, it's the trust.
It's the trust.
Yes.
And the trustees are appointed?
There's a representative group required by the agreement, and I can't remember.
I just think it's important that Ms. Hernandez understand what we're talking about here, if at all possible. If you could address that to her, maybe specifically later.
Sure.
I mean, I think
again,
a lot of
I'm
us.
saying what I know, but what I don't know is the makeup of the group. I know that there are it's community people, basically.
Yeah.
Sure.
Community
and it's
citizens.
not city. I think there's one city representative on the group, but the city does not control it. It's this entity itself that does that. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ogden.
Mr. Chair, I recall at our work session that Commissioner Zogmaster reported that we were improving in the homeless category, as I recall. Is that correct on that?
Yes, she's announced that we're improving slightly, but there's still a lot of homeless needs here in the community, and we're continue to sponsor and help those agencies that are trying to meet these.
I think the numbers, official numbers were released yesterday.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay. Motion?
Chair Garner, I move that we accept the proposed resolution 2012-7, adopting the annual action plan for a period of July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013.
I second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Van Huzer and a second from Councilmember Stevens to adopt the annual action plan 2012-7. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Huzer?
Aye.
Councilmember Wiggs?
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair?
Aye.
Chair Garner?
Aye. Thank you. Next on the agenda is reports from administration. Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Ogden, I think, is covering this item also.
Chair, members of the council, this is my second item of the evening, and it's in relation to revising an existing program that community development has been operating for the past 7 years. We started the exterior loan program with some EDI funds that we received, and the amount allocated to that program was fairly limited, so we weren't able to do much. And we haven't done many loans over the past few years. Now with the new fund that we've been able to receive through the payoffs from the special purpose grant, we have a fund in the amount of $440,000 that we thought would be appropriate to put into a loan pool to help people to fix up their homes. And that through the repayment of those loans, we could keep that fund going and expand our influence and improvement in the neighborhood. So we're proposing that we revise the exterior loan program and call it the Home Exterior Loan Program, which is the acronym of HELP, and keep it a part of the East Central Revitalization Strategy, with a focus on improvements to housing that make significant visible improvements that stabilize deterioration and improve the appearance of the home. It's kind of a critical thing in terms of the effect that it can have in the neighborhood and to generate some motivation on the part of others to invest in their homes and something that the neighborhood can not only know that they have their home fixed, but others can notice that these improvements are done as well. So it's kind of a facelift type program as well. It makes use of the SPG program income, as I mentioned. The new program expands the scope. We had a fairly limited scope under the old program. Again, limited money and limited scope. So we're thinking that it would be a good idea to allow any exterior work on a home that could be done, such as roofs, porch, windows, exterior paint, concrete, fencing, sprinklers, things in the yard, things on the home mainly that would meet these objectives. Again, as I mentioned, stabilizing deterioration, improving the appearance. let's see. We've made the proposal that the loans be larger to take into account those that might have bigger needs or could afford to borrow more and do more work on their home, and just create a greater effect and help them. And again, the benefit is that it generates a loan fund that can be perpetual and ongoing. Just to briefly outline what the guidelines are. It's properties in the East Central neighborhood. There is no specific limitation on who can qualify, which house is targeted or anything like that. It's basically any house in the East Central neighborhood, but it does need to be owner occupied. There is no income limit. Licensed contractors need to do the work.
So is it how do you, because it says all work must be done by a licensed contractor that is approved by Ogden City?
Right.
Do you have a list?
The approval is,
do they have to have
basically they need to be
license?
licensed for the type of work that they're undertaking.
Okay.
For the most part. And we want to make sure they're insured and, that they're a bona fide contractor so that homeowners don't get in trouble.
They contact you and tell you who's doing the work, and you follow up on that?
Yes, we have a mechanism that we would, and we've done this over the years, loaned money to people. So we've got a mechanism for doing applicant intake and screening, and then helping them develop a scope of work, coaching them as they get their bids, or actually helping them get the bids themselves, depending on their, their needs. And then kind of monitoring the work as it's going on, and then helping them get it paid. And so we hold their hand the whole way. So it's really quite helpful to homeowners.
Remarked that you, in the very beginning, about EDI grant funds. Explain what EDI is.
Economic Development Initiative.
Good. I don't think most people understand that.
Right. It's one of those, it's the name that was given to earmarked funds that Congress gave in the 90s. It's one of those names. And we were fortunate enough to get some of that. So,
would that be repairs, like fence repairs, or could they install a new fence is allowed?
Could be either.
Same with sprinklers.
Sure.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that everything complies with the zoning ordinance and the building code, and so we work with them. We have good construction management skills and good staff that knows how to do that. The other thing that we want to do is preserve historic buildings and historic fabric. So we undergo what's called a 106 review. It's a mechanism for screening the work against the Secretary of the Interior standards for renovation and determining whether the home is eligible for the National Register, how significant the work is, and what the effects might be on the building. So we want to try and preserve the historic nature of not only the homes, but the fabric on the homes.
And speaking of that, I think it's really important that if it is something it is historic and public money goes into it, that some way we recognize that home in a historic district. If we're putting any public or federal funds in that.
Are you suggesting that we coach them as they get their plaque for their house or something?
Take the next step to go ahead and put it on the National Register or local, or however they choose to do it.
The one advantage to that concept is that within the context of where these loans are eligible, we've done what's called the Central Bench Historic District, and that has designated, I can't remember how, I think it's 300 homes in that area. So there's a lot of historic homes that are already designated. I'm not sure if they missed any, but we could always cross-check to see.
But there is an application process, and I think if you could just hold our hand to get through that particular process, that certainly would help us with our historic neighborhoods.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's a good point. Again, the maximum loan is, there's no maximum. It's basically what the borrower can afford, how much equity they've got to secure the loan, and what the needs are, so what their renovation needs are.
So why wouldn't we limit it so we could help more people?
Well, I'm suspecting that it's going to be rare that we get a loan that's for anything more than, say, just the single-purpose item, such as the roof that they need or the driveway or the fence. There might be a couple of things, but I don't suspect it's going to be. And equity is going to be obviously a limiting factor, too. And so it was recommended by council members, maybe not all, but some, that we not have a cap, or that we have a very high cap, so that those that really want to undertake a historic preservation project, say, that could actually help them, and that we wouldn't be limited in and it can also provide an incentive for people to invest and stay in the neighborhood. So it has that advantage. That's the loan maximum. And then again, keeping the interest rate low as a means of helping those that might have moderate and low incomes, and also as an incentive to those other people to invest in their homes. But we also need to have a minimum payment too, so that we can afford to service these loans. And then again, the final point is that the loan to value, we'll loan up to 100% of equity. That's the program as we recommend it. We're ready to go. If we have the funds in the account now, and we have forms and procedures and marketing material all ready to go. So if you approve, we will hit the fan and put it on the web and get the brochures going.
Can this money be accessed by foundations? Can a foundation, a nonprofit foundation come in that's buying homes?
It'd have
live
to be
in the home.
That's clear. It is owner occupied.
Yes.
Every one. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Is this a signature loan, or is it
It'd be a secured loan.
Great.
How long does it take the application to go through to approve the loan?
That's a good question. Our goal is to try and get that down to about a month, if possible, because of course specification and bidding requires some time, to get bids and process that. But I think we can process these in around a month, and sometimes maybe even sooner. Are there any other questions? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ogden. Questions from council members or further comments?
I think it will certainly help the neighborhoods. I mean, I think there's a lot of things you'd like to do to your house that you really can't afford, or you can't go out and find a loan on the open market for home improvement like this. And I know in some cases, porches and rebuilds of things like that are quite expensive, especially if you're trying to build it to historic standards.
Right. Well, I think too, for those, like you said, that just can't afford it, this is an opportunity for them to have an opportunity, or at least able to obtain a loan to fix maybe just a minor thing that needs to be fixed on their home. Other comments?
My understanding it's in the east central part of the city, is that right? The neighborhood? Okay.
That would be my only comment, is it would be nice to expand it into other areas that are equally as needy, but we understand that limited amount of money is the issue here. It'd be nice to.
It would be, yeah.
That's a valid request, I thought, to look at other parts of the city that are in on maybe the same condition that some of the other neighborhoods are.
Other comments? Okay. A motion?
Chair Garner, I would move that.
Or public input?
Oh, I'm going to have some input.
Sorry, we need to accept public input on the home exterior loan program.
Do you want me to repeat my name for the record?
Go ahead.
Virginia Hernandez Reza. As you can see, we've been doing our homework on these consolidation strategies since 2008 to today. I just want to say on what he was just going over, we do like that. For one reason, it's because I know a lot of people, and people who we know each other do have homes, and they are kind of falling apart and need to repair. So this would be a good opportunity for these people in that community to uplift their home for Ogden. Just one thing I would like to ask from the City Council people. I'm supposed to, is it Ward Ogden or Ogden Ward? Sorry.
Ward Ogden.
Ward. Sorry, Mr. Ogden. But could you encourage him? We're supposed to have a meeting, and I'm really glad that he's wanting to meet with us. Could you encourage him to meet with us so we can let him know how we can do this for the people, get that information out to them. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Further public input? Motion?
Further public input, I'll make a motion to adopt this ordinance.
Second.
We have a
Resolution.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Heyer to adopt proposed resolution 2012-3. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Heyer.
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens.
Aye.
Councilmember Van Huzer.
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks.
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner.
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair.
Aye.
Chair Garner.
Aye. This resolution passes. Thank you. Okay.
Could we follow up with Mr. Ogden? Could you make yourself available to meet with these good folks that I'm sure you would anyway, so is the best way just to call your office and to schedule some time? Okay.
Thank you. Next is the fiscal year 2013 proposed budget. Mr. Johnson.
While she's setting that up, it's a pleasure, Chair and members of the council, to be able to stand before you. I represent not only the mayor and I, but I also represent our department directors, which, if you noticed, all of them are here except for one who was at a Pinewood Derby. And since he's the police chief, we hope he's not cheating. So we are here because we think this budget represents all of us. And I can say I think this is my 9th budget presentation on this side of the podium, that I have never had a budget that more clearly represented the directors and their feelings about how the city should be run than what this budget is. Chief Matthews, I hope he doesn't mind if I quote him. I just want to make sure he's awake. But Chief Matthews said that in all his years as chief, he's never had this much involvement in the budget. So we feel very good about the product we're delivering. Collaboration and learning to collaborate sometimes takes a little longer time. And so right up front, we apologize to your staff because they're the ones that haven't got information as quickly as they normally do. And we apologize to them and are grateful for their willingness to work with us as we strive to learn how to work and play in a little different environment. So this budget represents that. I wanted to start out maybe on a little more serious tone because I think this budget is a serious matter that we really need to have a good discussion tonight. And we'll have many. Tonight's more of a presentation to get your appetite wet. We can't present everything in this budget. But to kind of give you some highlights and some philosophy, and then I think we have 6 or 7 more work sessions. I'm guessing 6-ish. And the idea is that then you'll get more detail, and there'll be some public hearings where we have some of the members of the community and employees who might even want to weigh in on some of this budget. So tonight we won't be trying to cover all that. I think one of the very most defining moments that I have seen the city go through, maybe in 34 years that I've lived here, was in January. I believe that probably one of the saddest days that I have experienced in public working in the government sector was on January 4th. When we had the very unfortunate shooting that took place that involved our officers. And as we stayed up the entire night with them, and as we worked through the processes the next day, and as we worked on no sleep for about 3 days, and as we started to think through how to make this community heal, some of the plans that came forth, we envisioned a magnificent event that might help to heal some of the wounds and pull the community together. If you remember correctly, what took place far exceeded anything that we had dreamed up. The outpouring from the community, the outpouring from our employees, the outpouring from our police department showed us what kind of community we live in. what kind of employees we have. The mayor was in my car, and fortunately, my wife was with me, so he sat in the back and said how grateful he was for the tinted windows because he bawled like a baby all the way down the funeral procession route at the outpouring of love and concern and sympathy that came from the community. It's an odd way to start a budget presentation, I know, but I think I learned a lot about the community and I learned a lot more about our employees, and I've come to the conclusion that we can endure anything, and if we pull together and we work together, we can find solutions. We're in economic hard times, and as I have met with our congressional leaders in last week, I'm come to the conclusion that it's only just begun to be hard times. I believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, the state of Utah and Ogden City will lose a substantial amount of the subsidies we receive from Washington. I think it's going to hurt a great deal. And I think our country has to go through that. And I think as we start to go through some of those kinds of experiences, we have to think differently as political leaders. As leaders of our community, we have to start thinking different about how we're going to react to those kinds of things. So I just bring back a memory of pulling together, and yeah, it's not as big a tragedy, but it certainly is something that we have to pull together. We're asking our employees to pull together. Mayor Caldwell says often that we are asking our employees to do more with less, and that is a very difficult thing to do. Some of the revenue challenges that we face in this budget, and I think in the next few years, number one is the growth of our sales tax base. The sales tax base has got to grow because it's the biggest part of our revenue. One of the problems we have is that people have become savers. And that's a good thing long term, but short term that really impacts how much money we bring in to the city. When the saving rate gets up 4, 5, and 6%, that means that there's a whole lot less money being spent in the mall and being spent at the grocery store and being spent on other restaurants and movie theaters and et cetera. We think that we can continue to try and recruit more into our community and to continue with the rebirth, but it's going to be slower. It's harder to find retail to come. And as we commented when we met at the state level and also at the federal level, I don't know how many more Walmarts there is for the state of Utah. And cities within the state of Utah have got to figure out how to find different ways to generate increased revenue. If you think about it, if revenue doesn't increase but expenses do, how do we pay for it? And probably the number one issue that's been how do we continue to compensate employees to keep them? That has been a huge problem for us in the last few years. It's going to continue to be a problem until we figure it out. A lot of mature cities, and Ogden is a mature city. It was one that was incorporated in 1851. It's one of the oldest cities in Utah. But a lot of the mature cities like us are meeting and scratching our heads and saying, how can we continue to increase revenue enough that we can cover the increases to the expense line? Growth of sales tax base is a huge problem that we face, and we face it with a lot of other cities. We have some answers, but so far, the state really doesn't want to hear some of our answers. We have an eroding tax base, and let me give you an example of that. We have the next generation that's coming up that's buying most things online. The online sales are absolutely killing the brick and mortar businesses in our community. And the more people who buy online, the less people pay sales tax, and so it impacts our police service, it affects our fire service, and it affects all the other services we do as a government. We've got to figure out how to replace or at least begin an internet sales tax so that we can bring at least them into parity of what they can offer people when they purchase. More and more people are purchasing off the internet and are not contributing to the tax base, and yet the services that we provide they use. And so this is a huge problem in the state of Utah. It's a huge problem in the nation. As we spoke with some of our congressional people, they assured us that they are working on this problem and that this is one of the number one areas that they're trying to fix and they're trying to work on. Another revenue challenge is retention of current sales. Because there's such a depletion of revenue amongst the communities in our area, that the pilfering is starting to take place from one another. We recently lost a car dealership to a neighboring city who gave them a tremendous amount of tax increment and other things to be able to relocate. That left a pretty good sized hole in our sales tax revenue. What's going to start to happen is we'll start to feed off each other. We'll start to as cities, we'll start to steal from each other so that we can keep our sales tax up. We think the retention of our current businesses is of prime interest. And one of our strategies this coming year is to pay a whole lot more attention to our current businesses. We're going to be out visiting with them. We're going to be out seeing them. We're going to be trying to make sure we take care of their needs. We think it's a lot cheaper and a lot easier to retain than it even is to go out and recruit new. And I think sometimes in the past we've recruited new and they've had people going out the back door at the same time. Our goal is to hang on to the businesses that are here, make them happy to be doing business here, hopefully helping them to be successful so they stay here, and then continue with the recruiting process to increase. We have property tax headroom in our city. We debated as we looked at the revenue as a management team whether we should take a look at increasing property tax. As we look at the fact out of the census, we discovered that Ogden City is twice the state average in the poverty rate of the state. We don't think at the predicament that some of our citizens are in and some of the condition of the unemployment and other things that within our city that they could stand the increase. And so we decided it was not the right thing to recommend increasing our property tax. But we also are having a little bit of a problem where the appraisal value of some of our properties are going down a little bit. That's statewide. We're hoping that eventually we'll see an upswing in that, but that's also becoming a problem. As you know, we've banged this drum now for a couple of years. We have an antiquated system for B&C road funds. B&C road funds are funds that are collected through the sale of gas, petro, if you're British, for the maintenance of roads. It is not set on dollar amount, it is set on number of gallons. And so as prices go up, people drive less, which means the number of gallons decrease, which means we get less money. And what we've found is that we have about half as much money coming to us in B&C road funds as we did back in 2006 and 2007, which means we have a whole lot less money to keep our roads up maintained. What's going to happen is it's going to be a crisis all over the state of Utah eventually for cities to maintain their roads because they're going to become so disrepaired because there aren't funds to take care of that. We're encouraging the legislature to take a look at that. You have to pick the right year when it's not an election year, apparently. But we'd love for them to go to some other system of collecting tax so that it's a little more representative of being able to take care of our roads in our system. Sometimes the creation of jobs does not always bring direct revenue to the city. It's an interesting concept. Jobs are healthy. We think we need jobs. We need to put people to work. But we get zero income tax dollars. Our hope is that they'll either live in Ogden when we bring the jobs here or that they'll work and spend money in Ogden. Spending money in Ogden. Salt Lake City did a recent survey because their daytime population doubles on any given day. They did a study and recognized that a person would have to, if they didn't live in their city, they would have to spend $58,000 a year within Salt Lake City in order to compensate for the amount of money Salt Lake City is spending on infrastructure so that they can come into the city and work. Well, nobody spends $58,000 in the city that they don't live in. And so it's an interesting thing. We still are going after jobs and we're still trying to create jobs, but you have to know that all these jobs we're bringing in, sometimes there's not a direct revenue that comes to the city as a result of that. We have to work on our housing stock. We have to work on the school systems. We have to work on a lot of things to get people interested in living in Ogden when they come here for a job. Our Community and Economic Development Department has done a wonderful job at bringing in new jobs into our community. we've just got to get the people now to be able to live here and spend their money here and to play here and to do all of those things, which will then show a direct revenue back to the city as a result of the creation of the jobs. We have some expenditure challenges, and I'll go through these briefly. Of course, there's the traditional insurance challenge. We don't blame that on you, Chair Garner, but it helps support you and your family, but it is a problem. Insurance is out of control. The cost of medical is out of control, and I've talked to businesses from every spectrum who tell me this is one of the #1 issues that they face every year. And I'll talk about insurance a little more in a minute. Retirement is a huge issue, and if the economy doesn't come back soon, I don't know that we're going to be able to continue to afford to compensate the retirement fund. We'll have to, by state law, we have to. But the amounts that we're having to contribute and the amounts that they're foreseeing in the next few years are astronomical amount of money. Something has to be done, and when we thought we had the great fix that one of our state senators took place in a couple of years ago, that hasn't been the great fix. And it's still causing a major amount of issues for us financially. Fuel continues to rise. I don't know about you, but I pass over the $100 mark all the time when I fill up now. Fuel is a huge problem that we're facing here as a city. You know, if you think about all the miles, say just the police department alone drives, you can imagine what our fuel bill is and how it's increasing. And we have not increased the funding for fuel in many years because we haven't had it to increase, and we've made directors actually go find the money to be able to keep that account whole within their departments. We have, because of prior philosophies, management philosophies, we have not managed the fleet and replacement of the fleet like we should have. It's woefully behind. We have vehicles out there that we think are past their life, and we're working hard to come up with a strategy how to start a process to come back and maybe force some discipline long term into not allowing these types of things within our city to become so antiquated and so costly to replace. Forced discipline is very hard in government because we work in 4-year cycles. Council works in 2-year cycles almost, because every 2 years there's an election. And so it's a very difficult thing in government. I never had this issue as much in corporate America because we didn't have those kinds of cycles we had to work around. This is a huge problem for us. We have officers in cars that we shouldn't have. We have some of our people in parks that are driving vehicles that we probably shouldn't have them driving. We're working hard on a plan to be able to move this forward and make some changes. We have a declining and negative fund balances. We have that problem. We barely made our mandatory minimum fund balance that the state requires. I think by what, $50,000 wasn't much. Wasn't much cushion there. And unlike a lot of the cities around us who have a little bit of a rainy day fund, we do not. And part of that was a philosophy over the last few years. We have got to change that philosophy and have a program in our mind over time to be able to build back a little bit of a rainy day fund and be a little more on solid footing when it comes financially. We've delayed infrastructure improvements. You know, you think about just the streets alone. Some of the streets we're starting to get some complaints about how choppy they are and how many problems that they have with some of those streets. And that's just to name a few of the infrastructure improvements that are becoming delayed because we just don't have the funding to be able to take care of it. We have, this is an accounting term, but the underperforming asset means it's not making the revenue that it was projected to make, or it's at least not covering its expenses. We have 3 basic areas that probably qualify into this area, and that's the golf courses, the pools, and the airports. We're working hard to get all of that. Well, the pools, maybe just because of the seasonality of them, we may never get them to that point. We're working hard on the golf. Golf had a tremendous March. A little good weather goes a long ways in the golf program. They had a great month. We're working hard on the airport. I think we're going to make some progress on the airport. But these still are expenditure challenges because they drain on the general fund. And we have a lot of other unfunded increasing expenses. You all see the increase in your Questar bill, and you see the increase in your Rocky Mountain Power bill, and you see how everything is increasing. In our fleet program, we've got things that are increasing, such as oil products. Oil has increased, air filters have increased, everything increases. We're not funding those increases, and so they're unfunded, and we're trying to figure out how to manage those and keep those alive. I'm not trying to paint too dismal a picture. I'm trying to say the reality is this is where we are. I think it was a huge shock to Mayor Caldwell, who had no idea, and he was in major depression when we had a 2-day retreat to go through the budgets, because he had no clue where we were financially. We do have some highlights in this budget. The first is we are recommending and proposing to you a one-time allocation of 1% bonus to employees. The thought process that the directors had was that it might be good to do between Thanksgiving and the first or second week of December, so the employees could use it for Christmas. But we're recommending, I don't give you my speech I give every year about one-time funds for one-time expenses and ongoing funds for ongoing expenses. We don't have the ongoing funds to do a merit increase, but we have been able to find 1% that we think we could at least tell the employees we're sorry, it's not more, but this is what we have to be able to help. In some action that's going to be proposed to you in the next few weeks, along with some actions that are being proposed in the new budget that we are giving you tonight, we're proposing the funding of 30 new police cars. If you've ridden in some of our police cars, they're pretty ancient. They have a lot of miles on them, and they're wore out, and the paint's wore out on them, and the parts are getting difficult to continue to replace. And so we think this will be a huge shot in the arm in their program. It's a pittance of where we need to be, but it's a good beginning. And as the chief has shared with the officers the plan to go this direction, they've been very, very excited about the opportunity to go that direction. We're proposing in this budget the funding of a property purchase for the new Station 3. This is a huge shot in the arm for the fire department. Probably something that could have and should have happened a few years ago, but this is a needed thing. I was in Station 3 recently. They fed us dinner, or lunch, and it was delicious, but as we took a tour, I realized that the Station 3 has long outlived its usefulness, and we need to put something that we would feel comfortable having our people stay in 24/7. We're proposing to move animal services to the police department. It has not been a great fit to have it in the community economic development department, and we feel much more comfortable moving it to police department. That's common amongst a lot of cities in the state of Utah and around the country. A common place for animal services to go, and that's what we're proposing in the budget. We're proposing moving emergency services from risk management back to the fire department. It used to be in the fire department. We believe that they are emergency planners. They do that about every day, and they're very good at it, and we think that's where it belongs. And so Chief Matthews has been willing to allow us to move that, or to propose moving that back to the fire department. We're proposing moving the risk management department to human resources. Risk management's been a division of 2 people. We think that the funds could be better used, and we need a different level, really, of management. And so we'll be proposing that the risk management be moved under human resources. Once again, that's a commonplace for risk management. Our human resource manager was over HR and risk management in her previous job and is very familiar with that function. We're proposing a new fire training and emergency battalion chief. If you remember, and I can't remember how many years ago the fire audit was, 4 or 5 years ago when we had the fire audit, one of the things they recommended was that we needed to have a training officer. we thought this year we would start off with a dual purpose person. We've been able to find the funds from existing funds. These are not new money, but we're proposing that we make a battalion chief position for fire training and also for the emergency. Last year, I told you the quote from Moody's, Mark Zandi, that we dug ourselves in a very deep hole, and he thought it was going to take a full 5 years to recover in most areas: unemployment, wages, personal wealth, etc. This year's quote, short term, it's not. 5 to 10 years seems to be the conventional wisdom of how long the Great Recession and its aftermath will focus our attentions. No, there is no consensus on how long. We hear Chairman Bernanke has told Congress, and the Federal Reserve has said they make no plans to increase interest rates until late 2014. That's quite a ways away. So as we have started to review where we are economically, we think that we just need to be conservative. We have no idea when and if our economy will return. And I think that I can find many people who will validate that. Zions Bank did say, though, everyone in the nation is not very good, but Utah's not quite as bad as all the others. That's basically what that quote says. We have one of the fastest growing economies in a very slow growing economy. And so we're grateful for that. We have a lot of things happening here that aren't happening in other parts of the country. The national unemployment average is 8.3. Nationally, the poverty level out of the census said it was 15.1%. Utah's unemployment rate is 7.4%. The poverty level is about 10%. And Ogden, we were unable to get this last month's numbers, but we believe we're somewhere between 10 and 11% unemployed, and our poverty level is about 20% according to the census in 2010. So the numbers, these are the fun part. We're proposing to you a 1.2% increase in the general fund. The Ogden City total funds represent the general fund and the enterprise funds, and we're recommending an 8.37% increase. The RDA, a 2.94% increase, and the MBA, and you'll hear the budgets presented for the RDA and the MBA next week, is reducing just slightly. So total municipal budget, we're talking about almost $164 million budget, or an increase of 7.59. Most of those increases are coming from grant funds that we're receiving, and also the CIP that we have recommended, which I'll show you in a minute. Just to remind you of the significance of some of our general fund revenue, as you can see, sales tax is the biggest at 27% of our revenue. Property tax is about 16%. And franchise tax, which is the utilities, Questar, Rocky Mountain Power, et cetera, are about 12%. So we have approximately 64%, 63% of our revenue comes from 3 taxes. And so you can see why we're so heavily dependent on sales tax. Sales tax is the most volatile of them all. And we probably watch sales tax more than we do any of the other revenues. General fund revenue, the 2012 number is a projected budget. We will not hit that number, $50,603,000. But you can see where we're projecting 2013's budget in relationship to the last few years. Sales tax, we had projected a budget of $13,225,000. We think we're going to come in around $12,925,000. We just got the latest numbers that were horrible. Sales tax has kind of been all over the board lately, so it's kind of hard to get a bead of where we really are. But you can kind of get a sense of when it hit its peak and when it's been going down since. To give you a little better idea, I think why, this is a graph since 2003, and you can see it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. I put in when Winco and the Junction businesses came, and you can see from 2010 to 2011, we had a pretty good increase. And then when the Walmart was built, we had a pretty good increase between 2011 and 2012. Had we not had those businesses come to town, I think the graph would look significantly different. And probably would have had a huge effect on services and on number of employees that we were able to keep. So we're very grateful to have those businesses in our community. We're hoping people support them and spend their dollars in Ogden. We can use all the sales tax dollars we can get. You can see the line. It's headed in the right direction. It's just slow. It's going to be a very, very, very slow recovery, and I can show you as you look from month to month how dramatic the increase. The red numbers are not good numbers. The black numbers are good numbers. And you can see this last month we were below last year, and we were about 10% below budget. So for the year so far, we're about $310,000 below budget. We're about $560,000 above last year. So that's a good sign. That's a good increase. It's not quite what we had projected, but it's a good increase. Property tax is pretty flat. You can see it doesn't change a lot. It's constant, it's steady, but we're not seeing, and a lot of the building that's taken place in Ogden is taking place in RDAs, which means we're not realizing the property tax immediately. We won't until probably beginning 2017. So we have a few years left to start realizing the property tax on those properties. Had a fat finger there. Just a reminder, when you get complaints from the community about how high our property tax numbers are, Ogden City is responsible for 19.41% of the property tax. Weber County is responsible for about 23%, and Ogden City Schools is responsible for about 48%. So a lot of times when people say, my property tax went up, what did you guys do? We didn't do anything. But it could be any of these other entities that's caused property tax to change. And any of them with a truth in taxation hearing can raise the property tax, their portion of the property tax. By the way, we're going to be sending you this presentation, so these numbers will be helpfar to you, I think, if you want to explain to the public. Franchise tax, just slowly going up. It's steady because Questar and Rocky Mountain Power keep raising the rates. That's a good news and bad news. When I'm at work, it's good news when they raise their rates. When I go home, it's bad news. Major revenue changes. You can see property tax is not changing much. It's about $50,000. This is from budget to budget. This isn't where we think 2012 is going to come in. You can see sales tax is only changing $64,000 in the budgeted amounts. Like I said, we do not think we're going to come in at $13.2 million. We're going to come in probably $12.9 million. So we are budgeting some increase for sales tax, but we've been very conservative in what we've proposed. Franchise tax and telecommunications, not a huge increase. Licensing and permits have gone down a little bit, and courts and fines and forfeitures are staying about the same. We're finding that people are having a hard time paying courts, fines, and forfeitures. And we get more and more people who want to do they're picking to do volunteer work other than pay fines. And that doesn't generate revenue. Hopefully it generates good projects around the city that we take advantage of. General fund expenditures, you can see that the police department, maybe that's why he's at Pinewood Derby. He didn't want to, be the big dog on the graph here. They're about 33%, fire's about 13%. And you can see as you go around the wheel how the general fund expenditure is divided amongst the departments. I'm almost done. CIP fund projects. These are the projects that are in the budget that we're proposing. And we'll be going into detail on those in one of your work sessions. The ones that have stars beside them are ramp grants that we have been awarded. If you see on there that there's a Bonneville Park and there is a Lauren Farr Pavilion and there's a few others in the parks, backstops at Bonneville Park, Those are half the amount we need. Our goal is if we can set the money aside that this next ramp season, we think we can get the ramp funding for the other half of those. And we would double the effectiveness of our money on those projects. Employees, if you look at our general fund, 64% of the general fund goes to employee compensation. So anytime we have to cut funding, you can see that there's a good likelihood it's going to affect employee compensation. To give you an idea how the different departments are, and I didn't put the council and the mayor's office and legal, but you can see the proportion of compensation for fire and police is very heavy. Management services is fairly heavy also. Changes to employee compensation. If you look at compensation as a total package, it gives you an overview since '09 of what we have done and what we're proposing this year. And the percentages of the general fund wages that's gone to wages are along the bottom. Once again, we'd love to bring some stability to it. We'd like to get health insurance under control and retirement under control, and that would give us more funds to be able to put in the employees' pockets. Health insurance, if you look at this graph, it's disgusting. It's just going out of the roof. I don't know anything that's growing at this rate. And we started out with an 18.8% renewal rate from Select Health. It should have been in the 20s. They were great to us. We were able to get it lowered a little, and then we started to have to change some of our programs and what the employees will end up paying. So we got our total insurance increase down to 7.15. We're proposing that the city pay 4% of that, which in the general fund is about $250,000. Citywide, that's about $317,000. Retirement, once again, we've got the same kind of graph going on, not quite as steep as healthcare's been. And the damage to us in 13 will be $630,000 in the general fund and $757,000 total for the city. We've heard already that next year will probably be a little bit more than that, and the year after that could be even more than that. So it's not a promising outlook for the future. And you'll be getting this presentation. I think Amy Susan will be sending it to you. The budget will be available online tomorrow morning, and this will be the URL that you can go to get to the budget. I think John also has a CD for you, but it seems so old-fashioned to hand out a CD anymore. Lastly, I want to give a big thanks to our department directors. These individuals work very, very hard, along with our accounting staff, our HR department, and our employees. We put a lot of work into this budget, and we've put a lot of work into thought about how we can start to change the dynamics in our budget and in how we do business. We especially also want to thank your council staff. We thoroughly enjoy working with them, and this budget process has gotten a lot easier over the last few years, and I thank Bill and the staff for helping facilitate that. We thank you. This is a hard thing. I sat in your chair. I remember how hard it is to all of a sudden have a $163 million budget put upon you. We thank you for the extra time and the effort and your consideration for the things that have been proposed. We can tell you we're not infallible. Today about 1 o'clock, we already found one mistake. So we're going to find some of those errors, and we work well together. We call them friendly amendments, and we have a great relationship with your staff, and it'll be fun to go through this process. So that's our budget presentation. I bored you to tears, I know. I should have put a few jokes in, huh?
Any questions for Mr. Johnson?
I'd just like to make a statement that we always ask our employees to do more with less, and I think it's through their professional skills that they bring to work each day, their concern and love for the city, and and their pride in doing the best job that they can. And we are very fortunate to have the type of employees we have within the Ogden City operation.
If there's no further discussion, I would propose that we accept the 2013 budget for review and set the public hearing for June 5th, 2012.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Huser to accept the budget for review and to set the public hearing for June 5th, 2012. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That will be a fun night. Next is a budget opening. Proposed ordinance 2012-21. Mr. Arrington.
Chair Garner, members of the council, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Recently, there have been some issues that rise at the Lindquist Field that make it questionable to operate as a baseball facility this year. So before you tonight is a budget opening where we're requesting funding to take care of some of those issues. The boiler is in serious need of repair. I guess if you play baseball and you get through and you can't take a hot shower, that could be a detriment to playing. In addition to that, there are several areas of the roof that are deteriorating. One of those is over the office and the locker rooms. Another one is over their equipment area. And then there's been some vandalism that has affected windows, particularly in the ticket office area where they're handling money. So there's some damage to some of the bulletproof glass that needs to be replaced. And then one section of the grandstand has some caulking that's leaking, which is causing water to go down into the restroom. So to repair those items, it's anticipated, and we've gone out for bids on this, to cost $46,962. The proposal before you tonight is to transfer that money from a project 31st Street entryway, which we may recall was money put aside to match some state funds, and now the state's not going to do their part of the job. So we're recommending that this $49,000 be transferred from the 31st Street entryway account down to the downtown Ogden Stadium account so that these repairs can be made to the stadium prior to the opening of the baseball season. So that's what the budget opening is for. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Questions? Okay. At this time, we'll accept public input regarding the budget opening for Lindquist Field. No public input?
If there's no further discussion, I would make a motion that we adopt proposed ordinance 2012-21.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Wicks to adopt proposed ordinance 2012-21. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Huser?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair?
Aye.
Chair Garner?
Aye. This ordinance passes. Thank you. Next is on the agenda is the utility rate proposal. Mr. Symes.
Thank you. While we get that set up, I'll just briefly go over why, what it is that I want to present and just talk a little bit about that. Before we get to the agenda items, I just wanted to lay out what those agenda items were, what the actions were, and who will be giving the presentation. In addition to that, the second online survey just recently closed. I want to give an update as to the results of that, and then just briefly after that go over a couple of policy considerations that were identified for the study but not included with this study. So we'll start with this graphic. This was developed and shown a couple of months ago in March. And this shows some of the major pieces that go into the utility rate study and how they're related to each other and how they relate to the study and to the ordinance. You can see on the top there with some of the financial information, the CAFR contributes to the rate study. The master plans contribute to both the CIP and the rate study. That rate study itself is what is used to develop the rate ordinance, and then that rate ordinance is incorporated into the budget process, and the CIP is incorporated into the budget process as well. So that's just a little overview of how all those come together. As far as the agenda items, there are 5 separate agenda items that either relate directly or indirectly to the utility rate study. So as I mentioned, I just want to go through those. The first, this is not actually on the agenda. As I mentioned, the utility rate study doesn't actually get adopted. That's what is used to develop the rate ordinance. So the utility rate study, called the Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan, all of those elements that you saw in that graphic, the CAFR, the CIP, the master plans, input from the public, direction from the council, all of that went into developing this utility rate study. And this, as I mentioned, not formally adopted, so it's not on the agenda, but we will have an overview of that study and that document by the city's consultant, Cody Dieter. The first of the items on the agenda is the utility rate ordinance. As I mentioned, the study is what drives the actual ordinance itself. So this is where we would adopt an ordinance that sets the rates. The action for tonight is to set the public hearing for May 15th, and an overview will be presented by Mark Stratford from the City Attorney's Office. Next on the agenda is a utility rate joint resolution. This is proposed to be a joint resolution, and it outlines some of the financial policies related to the utility rate study. This would be adopted by a resolution. We want to have this on the agenda for action the same time as the ordinance and some of the other things. So tonight the action is to accept or not accept the resolution for review, and that will also be presented by Mark Stratford. Next on the agenda is the culinary water and storm sewer master plans. Both of these plans are adopted by a resolution. We will have a brief overview of those plans tonight by Greg Montgomery, the city's planning manager. The action for tonight is to set the public hearing again for May 15th. On May 15th, we will have a full presentation given to you by the engineers who developed and are representing the plans. And then the last thing on the agenda related to utility rates is the capital improvement plan, or the CIP. This plan is adopted by ordinance, and this is something that's done annually, whether we have the utility rate study or not. So this is something that you would be doing normally. I think the timing is a little off. We wanted to have this line up with the utility rate study because the 2 master plans contribute to the CIP, and all of those contribute to the rate study, so we wanted to get those lined up. So we will have an overview that will be provided by Janine Eller-Smith from the council office. And again, the action on the agenda tonight is to set the public hearing for May 15th. So to talk about the survey results, we did have a second online survey that was opened about 2 weeks ago. It was open through this last weekend. The purpose of this study is a little bit different than the first online survey. The first one, we really wanted to cast a wide net and get as much feedback as possible. With this particular survey, this was designed to get more individualized feedback on some of the specific policy considerations that were developed by the council. With this survey, we had about 130 participants. The first survey was about 360. This wasn't open for nearly as long. This was only open for a couple of weeks. The other was open for a couple of months. The survey itself had a total of 7 questions. 5 of those were related to specific policy considerations, and that included billing statements, rates for high-volume users, landscaping requirements, water-wise and drought-tolerant landscape options, and then an interest in education efforts for water-wise and drought-tolerant landscaping options. So, question number 1. was the current utility billing statement provides adequate information about water usage patterns and how these affect customer costs. About 40% either disagreed or strongly disagreed that these provide adequate information. About a third stated that they somewhat agreed, and 27% either agreed or strongly agreed that the statements provide adequate information. Just to address this a little bit, last month we did bring some options for changes to the billing statement to you, so you could take a look at what might be available to change that, to provide more information. The Water Department has worked to develop some final proposals. We'll bring those back to you and get your feedback on some of those bills or some of those changes that we think will help customers understand their bill a little bit better. Question number 2 was, do you have access to secondary water? This was a question that was asked with the first survey as well, and this was really just used as a gauge to understand who is taking the survey. The results for this survey, about 57% did not have access to secondary water, about 43% did. The actual city split is about 53% who do not have secondary and 47% that do. And this is a bit of a change from the first survey where 63% of those participants did not have secondary water and 37% did. For question number 3, the question was, water rates should be structured to charge more to high volume users in order to encourage conservation. Overall, there were about 75% of the respondents indicated that they strongly agree, or somewhat agree with this policy direction, and a quarter indicated that they either disagree or strongly disagree with this policy. And as that relates to the proposal, the higher rates for higher volume users have been included in that tier structure with the proposed ordinance. So the rates per 1,000 gallons increases as the usage increases. But we'll certainly talk more about that in a minute. So question number 4, Ogden City ordinances require that green lawns and appropriate landscaping be maintained. The question was how the participants felt about that. 44% said that those requirements were appropriate. About a quarter said that it was too difficult to maintain. Just under a quarter said that those requirements are unnecessary. 4% said that it was not restrictive enough, and then 4% indicated that they weren't sure. And just a little bit more background on this one, the council did have discussion as to whether or not there should be changes made to landscaping ordinances, and at the time, no direction was given that changes should be made. So there aren't any changes to the landscaping ordinance with the proposal. So question number 5, residents have the option to use water-wise or drought-tolerant landscaping. And the question was, again, do you believe the options for water-wise landscaping are? And 26% said they were sufficient. Just under 24% said they were not sufficient. 15.7% said somewhat sufficient. 2 of the respondents indicated that the options were very sufficient, and then a third indicated that this was the first they had heard of water-wise landscaping. So again, another one of those policy considerations that was looked at by the council was to start some sort of an education campaign to let people know what their options are as far as conservation and water-wise landscaping. So with a third of the people saying that they were not all that familiar with water-wise landscaping, we felt this would be a good opportunity to start that education. And then question number 6 goes along with number 5, and it says, if education materials and additional information about water-wise landscaping are made more readily available, how likely would you be to consider using this tool? 72% indicated that they would be either very likely or somewhat likely to consider this tool, and then 28% indicated that they were not very likely or not likely at all to consider this tool. So again, we feel this is a good opportunity for education. And then question number 7 asked if the participants would like to have their email included in the information list. We did add 74 new emails to that information list, and we've got a total of 278 on that.
Just hit the space bar.
Oh, I didn't have a slide for that one. Sorry. And then lastly, as I mentioned, a couple of the policy considerations. These were policy considerations that were identified early in the process, the Lateral Protection Program and the Ogden United Scholarship Program. These are not directly related to the utility rate study. Both of these proposals, however, would have an impact on the final bill a customer would receive. And so we thought it was important to identify these, at least so you understood that these proposals were out there and that it could affect a customer's bill along with any rate changes that are being proposed. These are still active proposals. We haven't gotten any information for a little while, so we didn't take these into consideration through the rate study, but just wanted to point those out that we did identify those, but we haven't had any specific discussion through the rates process. And that's all I have, so with that, we'll go ahead and turn some time over to Cody Dieter to go through the utility rate study document. Thanks.
Glenn.
Council members, it's a pleasure to be in front of you again. No Snickers, please. The Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan document we prepared, this is another name for a utility rate study, and I'd like to review the findings and the information we used to generate that study today in brief overview, and will be discussed again at the public hearing, if that's the direction you choose. The first thing I want to talk about is just an overview. This slide we showed several weeks ago, maybe several months ago now, when we were at the theater, just to flavor the discussion related to utility rates and paying for infrastructure over time. So this blue piece represents, in real terms, meaning there's no inflation included, how much it will cost to replace infrastructure over time. So assuming that there's a 50-year life for a piece of infrastructure, you're going to need to collect this amount in the triangle at some point before the infrastructure fails and needs to be fully replaced. And you can insert dollars in the middle and extend the useful life of those assets. So you may get an additional 20 years, depending on the asset, or some additional lifespan out of that. But over the life of it, you're going to have to recoup that amount of money in order to cover your infrastructure costs and replace it. One way of doing that is to set a dollar amount per rate in your rate so that you recoup that over the life of the asset, so you recover that, and that's the red line here. If you had charged that from the beginning when you put in the asset, you'd have sufficient revenue throughout the life of it to replace it at the end. What generally happens in most utilities is at the beginning, you don't charge a lot, you charge less. And over time, as you start going on, your utility department comes to you and say, you know, we need to start collecting more because we're not going to have enough to pay for all this infrastructure. So you get in this middle part where the rates start to bump up a little bit, and then you get in panic mode in this area where there's the reality that much of your infrastructure is failing and you need to replace it in the next few years. And so rates have a tendency at that point to climb very rapidly. And this is something that all utilities face. This is something federal government who has federal roads. Anytime you have infrastructure that is physical in nature, it deteriorates over time, you have this predicament. And so I thought it would be helpful to have this discussion at the beginning to flavor the reason why you may have seen rate increases in the city before, and why the Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan that we've helped the city prepare, why it's also recommending an additional rate increase and recommending the use of bonds is to pay for that infrastructure and the replacement of that infrastructure. So the agenda tonight, I'd like to be brief, but want to be as thorough as possible to explain the document that we've prepared. This idea of a comprehensive financial sustainability plan, I'd like to review with you what we mean by that term, and then talk about how that study related to the three utilities that were included in this document: culinary water, sanitary sewer, and the storm drain utility, and then give a summary of how the recommended changes will play out on an estimated bill or several estimated bills, so you can see the direct impact of that. So first, this concept of a comprehensive financial sustainability plan. The idea behind this is that you have a plan in place to ensure that your utility is functionally and financially viable into the future. Functionally meaning it performs its function in the way that it's intended and provides the service that it's supposed to provide. And that financially, that's an engine that makes sure it's functionally viable. So that's the purpose behind this comprehensive financial sustainability plan. And it begins with the master planning process, where an engineer or an engineering firm comes in and says, these are the things, this is the current state of your infrastructure for your utility, and this is what you'll need to do in the future to make sure that it maintains its functionality. Then from that document, a capital improvement plan is put together to begin implementation. That's something the city does, a 5-year CIP, to ensure that that's where that information is derived, is from the master plan. Then you also develop policies. We've discussed many policies in many work sessions, including financial policies, management policies. That also flavors how the system will run and the financial implications. The next step of this process is to do financial modeling and try to understand what are the financial or the revenue requirements that will be necessary to implement the capital improvement plan that's recommended and the policies that you've developed and agreed upon. And the last is, or the second to the last, I should say, the rate structure. How will that revenue be recouped? Where will it be derived? In the base, in the tiers, from commercial, from residential, how will that be collected? And then the end result is a communicative tool that helps you say, here's the results for sample users. So you can have a tangible something in your hand to say, okay, I see how that's going to impact me as a user. So let's talk about the culinary water briefly. The culinary water had a master plan prepared by Sunrise Engineering that recommended $43.8 million worth of infrastructure that would be necessary over the next 10 years. And the city has proposed, you've proposed a capital improvement plan that's modified from Sunrise Engineering to $46.7 million over the next 10 years. The major increase came from the treatment facility to upgrade that to a different type of facility that'll have lower operation and maintenance costs over the life of the facility. It also pushed off some of the recommended pipe replacement that were recommended in the master plan. Several of the key policies that were adopted or were considered in this process. First, financial ratios. We talked about having cash reserves at 150 days of cash on hand as a reserve measure, and debt service coverage ratio of 1.50 times, or $1.50 of net operating revenue to pay debt service for every dollar worth of debt that you have, debt service that you have. Also, other key policies that you'll have annual rate increases at the consumer price index for the Wasatch Front every year, so that your rates continue to stay on top of any inflationary pressures that occur, and that you adopt rates for 5-year periods so that you have a planning horizon and stability in your utility. Several other key policies: waste mitigation. There were 2 key components of waste mitigation. One, an education program. In the financial modeling prepared, there was a line item to include $50,000 of expenditure for an education program to talk about conservation. Also, conservation tier structures are in place to ensure that the more water you use over time, or the more water you use each month, it costs more per 1,000 gallons at certain thresholds. Then the other policy, final policy here, is the rate consideration, that you try to mitigate any large rate increases in any one year to 5% rate increase before inflation. So you may still have a CPI rate increase that could be above that, but that would be 5% for simply other considerations. So we then performed a financial modeling to ensure you had revenue sufficiency. If you have all of these policies in place and the capital improvements, how much revenue do you need to cover that? And a caveat here, just to make sure this is fully understood, the recommendations we're providing are that you have a bond issued in 2014 to cover the treatment facility, as well as other identified distribution and fire flow projects that have been identified in the CIP. And there will be a total bond issue. What we're recommending is somewhere in the neighborhood of 17.8, and a portion of that will be used for the storm drain utility, which we'll talk about later on. But the 13.84 million of that bond will be used for the treatment facility. So the rate increase for capital expenditures or other needs in 2013 and 14 would be a 5% increase, and in 2015 would be a 3.5% increase in revenue. In addition to that, we're recommending, well, this year the consumer price index for the Wasatch Front was 2.8%, and so you'd have a total revenue increase of 7.8%. 7.5 in 2014, 6% in 2015, and then 2.5%, which represents inflation. And that's an estimate. We don't know where inflation will be, but that's simply a pass-through of what inflation will actually be. The total rate per ERC per month, so dividing all the revenue that you'll need by the amount of equivalent residential connections that you have per month, you'll have 46.73, 50, 53 and a quarter, et cetera, going forward. And that will generate this amount of revenue, which will be sufficient to meet the financial policies and goals that you've outlined. To depict it in a graphical depiction, this green line represents the rate per equivalent residential connection, which will continue to climb after an initial bump, in that 7.8, 7.5 area, then at inflation thereafter. And the red line represents the degree or magnitude of rate increases. In the past, they were higher, and we'll slowly be having those go down. And I apologize, that's an error to have that last little cell there. Don't know where that came from. So then the revenue generation, that's how much revenue you need. Where will it come from? From the base rate versus the tier. So the base rate recommended is $17.50 for a 5/8 and 3/4 inch connection, which is 1 ERC. These ERCs, or equivalent residential connection averages for each of the meter sizes, would then be multiplied proportionally. So the base rates would go up according to how many ERCs they have equivalently per connection. These are the number of connections you had in 2011 and the revenue that you would generate based on your 2011 connections. So in this sample, you would collect 6.5% roughly in the base rate and 8.5 million in the tiers.
Cody, can you talk a little bit about how that compares to our current structure?
Currently, or I should say in fiscal year 2012 structure, this base rate is $14.98 or something like that for this connection size, the 5/8 and 3/4 inch connection.
And how about base versus tier? Or
base versus tier.
I'm not going to hold you to the number, but
it's fairly similar. There's a little bit more in the. Well, it's pretty similar. I don't want to give you false information, but it's very similar.
So is the breakdown with the residential and commercial the same as?
Roughly the same. It's roughly between 45 and 55 right now it's between 45 and 50%. It's in that range of 45 to 55% of the revenue comes from each of those classes over the last few years. Sometimes there's a little more from commercial and sometimes a little more from residential, but it's roughly equivalent.
So there's that same split in the proposed new rate?
Yes, the idea was to match the amount of usage from commercial and so if commercial is using roughly 50% and residential is using roughly 50%, to have the revenue roughly that. The caveat is there could be changes in connection, changes in usage, so there's I would say a 5% tolerance in there. It could swing either way depending on usage pattern changes and connection changes. But that was the intent. This would be the proposed rate structure for those with secondary and those without. These tier amounts, 6,000 was derived because that's the average usage in the community right now for the 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters. 6,000 to 12,000. 12,000 is the state standard for indoor use, and anything above 12,000 would be potentially considered wasteful usage and would be something to be encouraged to. There'd be a financial incentive to decrease your water usage. Without secondary, those tiers were increased because they do not have access to a secondary provider. So the state average is 42,000 gallons per month for outdoor usage in the summertime, indoor and outdoor usage. meaning there's 30,000 between 12 and 42, 30,000 for outdoor use. And then that's for a 30-acre lot. So the second tier would include those who have larger lots. And so indoor usage at $1.50 and $2.30 for those first 2 tiers are the same for both rate structures. And then the $3, which would be an encouragement to reduce wasteful usage, is the same under both tier structures. And commercial would pay $2.30 per gallon from the first gallon, per 1,000 gallons at the first gallon that they use. There'd be no tier structure for them. Here's some rate comparisons based on average usage in each of the categories. So, for example, 5/8 or 3/4 inch connections use on average in the city 6,000 gallons. Under the current or the 2012 structure, the charge would be $21.72. In 2013, it would go up to $26.50 or a $4.78 increase. And you can see the changes for each of those usage classes, each of those meter sizes, based on their average usage. So that was an overview of the culinary water system. I'd like to talk about the sanitary sewer. The sanitary sewer system does not currently have a master plan in place that has been adopted by the city. And there is one plan to be put into place or to be prepared in 2013, fiscal year 2013. And once that's reviewed, prepared, you'll have a better idea of where rates need to go or what capital improvements may need to be put into place for this utility. The city's CIP, capital improvement plan, currently has $1.2 million worth of projects over the next 10 years, which is not a lot of projects. We've also included $2.25 million worth of unplanned projects just simply for planning purposes, assuming, and that was found by just funding your depreciated asset amount that's on your books, the amount of depreciation. That amount will go away, 2.25, and will be replaced by whatever is found in the actual master plan when it's completed. And that 1.2 may also change depending on what the master plan finds. But those were the amounts that were used in this portion of the analysis. The key financial policies in this, for the sanitary sewer, cash reserves were moved up to 365 days of cash on hand, which is significantly better than what's in the water. This fund has healthy fund balances currently, and so you meet that 365 day, which is ideal for a city of your size and will help you get the best bond rating you can qualify for. Debt service coverage at 2 times or $2 of net revenue available for every dollar worth of debt service, which is also a very good standard and one we would recommend. These other key policies are the same as were found in the culinary water. Annual rate increases at the CPI and adopting rates for 5-year periods. Other key policies are also the same, that you have 5% rate increase cap, so there's not any one year where there's a large increase. And this policy is probably the biggest change in sanitary sewer, is that you link indoor water usage to the sewer charge, which is something the administration has determined they have the capacity or the ability to do. So that's a recommended policy that is included in this study. The financial modeling that will help meet those goals.
Can I ask a question about the last slide?
Absolutely.
With respects to the sewer rate, is it proposed that it be an average of some number of months of the winter usage, or is it just going to be December, or how's it going to be determined?
What's currently contemplated is right now my understanding is you're not able to read meters during the winter months, and so the concept will be you have to reconcile based on the last reading in October or November, whenever that occurs, and the first reading in spring, and so whatever that average amount is between those two readings will be the
6 months then. Okay.
be 6 or 5, depending on how many months that is. And so that'll occur in the winter months, and then once that's fully reconciled in March, April, May, then on July 1, you'll have that average already figured out. And on July 1, you'll set the rate for each account for the next 12 months for those who've had an account during that time. And then for the few who didn't have an account during that time, there'll be some type of default estimate that will be used until you can have actual. Yeah.
Cody, I just have one really strange question, but so we sort of have different cash reserves, different ratio, sewer versus water. If water goes out to bond, does anyone look at that sewer ratio and then do they look funny at why aren't you doing the same thing with water that you're doing with sewer? Does that impact the bonding?
Well, it will have some impact. The positive thing you have going for you as a city is your bonds are pledging water, sanitary sewer, and storm drain. All of those revenues are jointly pledged. So they're looking at all of those utilities together. So the fact that you have 150 days of cash on hand in the culinary will pull down the average amount of cash on hand that you have. But the fact that you have good fund balances in the other two will pull it up. But will it cause question in their mind? It will cause some question in their mind why you have some inconsistency. It probably will, but it's a practical matter, I think, for the city. I mean, you could make the decision, right? You know, when you adopt the ordinance to have 360 days of cash on hand, but it's practically challenging.
Right.
To do so.
Okay. Thank you.
It's probably a positive trade-off.
Is it natural to have these three categories be different in other cities, or are they basically about the same?
I would say, based on my personal experience, I've seen some that are different, but most of them are the same. And you try to, it's the same situation you have other cities have, where you may have one fund that is more healthy than another. And you try to equalize those out, but it's something that you can't do. Generally, once you start thinking about it and making decisions, it's hard to make a decision in 1 year to correct that. It usually takes a 5-year planning period, depending on how far out of line you are. Yeah. In the ideal world, you wouldn't carry it because you just make the changes, but there's practical considerations to.
Cody, I think this is one of the issues that the public is not aware of, is the cash reserve. And could you explain that again so people understand what we're talking about when we say we need 365 days of cash reserve in these accounts?
Be happy to do that. The concept, Mark mentioned in his presentation, the idea of a rainy day fund, and your general fund has to have a certain minimum balance in your general fund by law, by statute. That's to make sure you have enough money in case an emergency occurs. The same is true for your utility funds. You want to have some type of balance in there sometimes it's called a rate stabilization fund, to help cushion any blow that could occur if you needed to have an emergency draw on funds. You wouldn't have to immediately go to your ratepayers. Also gives you the ability to pay cash for some items during the year and as a cash flow issue. The specific usage of the words days of cash on hand is an industry term that's used both in municipal finance and I believe in the corporate world, where you talk about it's a measure of how much money you have in reserve in comparison to your operating expenses, and just tells you how many days could you operate your system if you had no new revenue coming into your coffers. So 360 days of cash on hand means you have roughly a year's worth of operating revenue. Just a way to compare apples to apples across utilities and businesses. Yep.
And that's the ideal number. And
Yes.
we're choosing in the water utility to go with a lower number just because we already have a huge burden, right?
Yes, that's correct. And over time, it would be the ideal to build that up over some period, if you could, to get higher, but.
So in linking the indoor water usage to the sewer charge, we have two sewer charges on our bill. One is what is charged by Ogden City, and the other is what Ogden City is passing on, the charge from Central Weber Sewer District. It's my understanding that it's a flat rate per connection for what Ogden is assessing people for the Central Weber Sewer District. Has there been any thought put into also connecting that to usage, so people are actually paying for what they use and the burden is going to those who are using the system more.
Yes, that's the current plan. Right now, my understanding of the ordinance, as I read it currently and has been explained to me, is the ordinance doesn't specify that you have money going to those two different
And
purposes.
I think it was separated because there have been some significant increases because of a new plant, and I think
For educational
to
purposes.
kind of say it's not Ogden City, to place the blame elsewhere, Ogden City separated it out on the bill, but it makes sense to tie that to the usage as well.
Yeah, the amount that the total amount is being tied to the sewer. It
Okay.
isn't being broken up into any segments at all.
Okay,
It's
because
just,
that wasn't really clear.
yeah, yep. So reviewing the financial modeling to determine the revenue sufficiency that would be required to meet these policy goals and capital improvement plans outlined. We're suggesting no revenue increase would be necessary other than the rate increase for the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. That would be sufficient to ensure you have revenue sufficiency over the planning horizon. Of course, the caveat is if a master plan is put in place, this may have to be modified in future years. But that's a discussion that you'll have at a later date. But for now, you have sufficient revenue to meet those obligations just with the CPI. Here's a graphical representation again of how rates would increase with the Consumer Price Index and how you've had increases in the past, and now you're saying they're going to have a slight increase of just 2.5% going forward, or whatever the CPI will be in those years. Now, the discussion about revenue generation, how will that, now that you know how much revenue you need, how will it be generated, the base versus the tier? The very same methodology applied in culinary water in terms of deriving the equivalent residential connection average per connection size was used. A base rate of $27.50 for this 5/8 and 3/4 inch connection was assumed, and then it proportionally is derived therefrom. This is the amount of connections that you have, or you had in 2011, and this would be the revenue that would be generated. So your base revenue would be estimated at 9.2 million under this structure, and 546 would be collected in the tier. So you have good revenue stability here because a lot of it's in the base rate. The base structure, currently, I believe you start charging for users above 25,000 gallons for residential. And the recommendation here is at 6,000, which is the average usage for indoor usage in the city at this point. So after that, then you'd be charged 35 cents per 1,000 gallons for residential. And all commercial users would be charged 35 cents per 1,000 gallons for usage.
How do you determine commercials' sewer usage as far as, I mean, I think that something that comes to mind is, and maybe it doesn't even apply here, but if you have a commercial entity that was selling some kind of a water-based product, so they're buying the water from you, but it's not going down the sewer, it's going out in the truck. How do you deal with that?
Very carefully. This hasn't been addressed, to be honest, Councilman Dyer. It hasn't been addressed in the study that we prepared or in the discussions we've had. If that becomes an issue, it may be something that needs to be addressed in the future,
okay,
and could be addressed later on. But right now, it's not really, that discussion hasn't come up. Doesn't mean it's not an issue, it just hasn't been addressed.
Well, I just could see, like Pepsi. They used to be in Ogden, they're not now, but it might discourage someone from coming into Ogden if they did have that kind of a business.
What would make sense is if that were an issue to have some type of an appeal process for it, but I don't know. Obviously, that'll be something you have to consider in the future. I can only say my personal feelings on that one, but it would make sense. And a rate comparison, a very similar chart to what was in the culinary. You can see that the majority of the users, based on average usage, will see a decrease in their sewer charge because you're linking that to their indoor usage. The 3-inch meters will have an increase because they have what I consider to have in the past have been undercharged for their usage. And so much of the revenue will be made up here and will also be made up by indoor users in these two categories, 5/8 and 3/4 and 1 inch, who use a lot of water for indoor usage for some reason during the winter months, which there are some who do that for some odd reason. They would help make up some of that revenue. But there would be, most users would experience a decrease. The storm drain utility, the master plan was prepared by JUB engineers last year, 2011. A $12.2 million capital outlay was recommended for the next 10 years, and the city CIP mirrors that recommendation. And these projects, it should be noted, are only for the purpose of looking at capacity, meaning you have sufficient sized system to get the water through, but does not deal with condition assessment. That master plan will be done, I believe, this year and next year, talking about the condition of your system. So there may be additional improvements that may be needed based on condition. Some of the key policies, again, are the same for storm as were for sanitary sewer. 365 days of cash on hand and 2 times debt service coverage ratio. And then the same key policies were also recommended for these two, for the other 2 utilities, annual rate increases at the CPI and adopting rates for a 5-year planning period. Again, same policy rate consideration of 5% rate increase cap before inflation. A discussion about the financial modeling and the revenue sufficiency. Here's where the other piece of the bond in 2014 would be used. And 4.5 million, it's assumed right now 4.5 million would be necessary from the bond in 2014 to help cover those projects, some of those projects. The majority of those, and I apologize, I can't remember the location of those, oh, I do have it right here. Those facilities are 28th Street, Ogden River, and Polk Avenue to Jackson. That's where the majority of the improvements are necessary, and that's what that full amount of bond proceeds would be used to help with that problem. And again, we're not suggesting that you'll need any additional rate increase above the CPI to maintain the policies and implement the CPI or the CIP, the capital improvement plan that's been recommended for this utility. Here's a depiction of the rate per ERC. It's really ESU, which is equivalent surface unit. It's an error on my part. But it would go up by 2.5%. And you had a rate increase last year, and we're expecting to have none going forward at this point. And then a comparison of a discussion about the revenue generation. There is no base and tiers in storm drain. It's not like water where you're generating something and using it. It's just the ability to get water away from you when it rains, basically. And so it's based on an equivalent surface unit or an ESU, which my understanding is that's 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. So your lot before you built on it was completely impervious, most likely. And when you put a house on it and a driveway and other things, now all of a sudden you have parts of your lot that are impervious. The water won't go down, and so it has to go somewhere. So if you're a commercial user and you have a big parking lot and a big rooftop, they divide that out so to determine how many ESUs you equate to, and then charge you based on that.
Do we have any users exempt from this charge?
I don't know the answer to that.
We don't currently allow exemptions. What we do have in the ordinance is for certain users, a 50% reduction or up to a 50% reduction, but that's an issue that actually I believe Public Services is going to want to bring back for some additional consideration in the near future.
And then looking at a comparison of the rates in 2012, fiscal year 2012, the rate per ESU was $6.91. And in 2013, at a rate increase of 2.8% for the CPI, it would be at $7.10 per ESU. So that's a summary of the storm drain utility. Now looking at all of the utilities together, what is necessary to ensure functional and financial viability over the planning horizon. These are the rate increases that would be necessary, and here's a sample for 5/8 or 3/4 inch users who use 6,000 gallons per month. Your current total utility bill, which includes sanitary sewer, culinary water, storm drain, garbage, etc., was $75.53. In 2013, the estimated utility bill would be $79.38, which is a $3.85 increase, or a 5.1% increase. So that's just for one user. So here's a table that provides the same user class, but based on different usage amounts for those with secondary and those without secondary. What would it be in 2012? What would it be in 2013? And the percent change.
Those are monthly figures, or?
Yes, per month. Yep.
Figure. It's not just water, it's everything.
Total utility bill for, and this was prepared by the utility department.
That was this summer or winter?
That'd be whatever month you use that number of gallons.
That's correct.
Well, and it must.
You can answer that.
It must be a larger trash can too, because
It probably is the larger trash can. Yeah. Yeah. I believe it's the larger trash can. For simplicity, we tried to narrow down all the assumptions so that it was fit on one table. But yeah, that would modify it downward. But it would do so proportionally. And that is the information I've prepared for today. If there are any additional questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Not yet.
Always good.
Later.
Always good to be in front of you.
Eric Garner, council members. Sorry I don't have a PowerPoint to show you, but you just have to put up with listening to me. There are two items that I'm going to be discussing. I'm actually going to be, I think, discussing them in reverse order than they are on the agenda as far as your vote taking, but I'll discuss both of them before I think you take action on either one of them. So I'd like to start off by discussing the resolution, the proposed joint resolution. And the reason I want to talk about that first is because we realized as we were developing this, going through this discussion and developing the rate ordinance, that it really wasn't quite possible to capture all of the information that was being discussed and all of the kind of, not necessarily assumptions, but the rules that were being applied, the goals that we were trying to attain. We couldn't really reflect all of that in just an ordinance that addressed rates. And something else that came up was as we looked at what we were dealing with here, as the committee looked at it, there was some discussion about how do things happen in the future? How do things get regulated? How do they happen in the future? And that was best able to be captured in a joint resolution. And so the joint resolution really, in my mind, accomplishes three things. First of all, it deals with this unique nature that we have in our government system, which is the council sets the policy goals for the city, and the mayor and administration then tries to achieve those goals. And by doing a joint resolution, we allow those two groups to come together. You both essentially agree that, yeah, these are the goals, policy goals that we want to meet, and here are certain kind of implementation measures that we hope will get us to those goals. And so it brings some unity to both the vision of the council and the mayor as far as how that's going to happen. The second item that it really addresses, there's been some discussion about, when we make these goals and objectives, how do we let future councils know that what we were thinking? We can't bind them financially. We can't force them to do anything. But with the joint resolution, hopefully it captures what the goals were here so that as future councils make their determination, they'll be able to do that with the perspective of what we were trying to accomplish in this process. And again, can't bind them, but will hopefully provide enough of a basis that they can kind of stay on that same course, or if they choose to change course, that they will have, to make some kind of justification or understanding about that they are in fact changing course. And then the third item, which actually is a bit of a byproduct, but something that the consultants actually like about this joint resolution, is that by having these things written down, when it does come time to go out to some kind of lender bond of some kind, then this can be presented to rating agencies to say, look, this is what the city has adopted and what the city wants to do long term, and how they operate an efficient utility system, and that brings then stability, hopefully, to that analysis and is reflected, hopefully, in the rating that we receive. I'm not going to go word for word through each of the items that are in there, but just suffice it to say that what Cody has presented to you essentially as policy items are the things that we've tried to capture in the joint resolution. First one has to do with revenue sufficiency, that each utility should be operated in a way that there's sufficient revenue to make that utility operate healthy. But there's also recognition that when it comes time to change rates, if we have to do more than a CPI rate increase, there should be some dialogue between the council and the mayor early on in that process to try and address those problems. The next item is that it's important that we have updated master plans. We have probably not done as well as we could have in the past in having consistently updated master plans. And so this sets out some goals to have master plans that are adopted and that are updated on a reasonably timely basis. Also, that we make sure that as we're operating the utilities, in particular water, that we're setting aside, we're actually doing ongoing maintenance as we go along. We're not deferring maintenance into the future. There's an item that refers to debt, and when we take on debt, what are we going to try and use to guide us in both the amount of debt and what kind of debt we seek. And so it expresses a preference, first of all, that debt be limited to what it is that we've identified that we really need to have done, and then that when we make that decision that we seek the lowest cost debt available to achieve those objectives. Then we address the debt service coverage ratio, and I think this is, whether we're unique or not in the fact that our water department has a different debt service coverage ratio and different cash on hand than our other departments, at least in this document we express a desire to get those to be the same at some point in the future. Now there's no deadline set in here, and so I don't know exactly when that would happen, but at least lets people know we're hoping to make all of our funds operate at the same level, and that we need to take some steps to try and achieve that. Then two specific water utility issues are included, and we felt like that these were, even though they're not directly potentially related to the actual bigger policy issues, that they were things that needed to be expressed because of their significance in the discussion process. And that is that there needs to be a focus on education for conservation, both outdoor and indoor usage, and so as part of that, there's the idea that with the request that's going to be in the budget for $50,000 a year for education purposes, that there will be a report back to the council about how that money's being used, what kind of success it's having, if there's any kind of way to measure the effectiveness of that educational component. And also then that we need to recognize that because of our situation where we have some homeowners without irrigation water and some that have outside irrigation water, that we need to try and encourage through the rate structure the ability for people to keep their landscaping in a healthy manner, that they can do that. And then finally, a few kind of ongoing management policies and procedures about review of these processes by the Public Services Director and timely reporting if it looks like that something's kind of out of whack. If there's a problem, that we get on that as soon as possible. So we feel like that joint resolution captured those big picture items that the council had made a priority as part of these discussions, and hope that you see that as well. I don't know if there's anything we've left off of there. We tried to make sure we covered all of the bases there. And then with the ordinance, most of the ordinance is really just the nuts and bolts of taking the numbers that the consultant has provided us and plugging that into our existing fee structure. And so the first section of the ordinance directly addresses sewer. It readjusts the base rates and defines winter usage in response to Councilmember Heyer's question. And you know, when the concern originally about assessing usage to sewer was that I think the idea was, well, we'll try and figure out and charge a monthly every month like we do with commercial. Commercial, they're able to read those meters every single month. And so that's why they're able to bill their usage or their sewer based on usage. But with the culinary, we didn't have that capability. And so as Cody reported, what the ordinance proposes to do is to take the last final reading of the year, the first final reading of the next year, and then use that average monthly amount for the succeeding fiscal year, essentially. When we get the water meters in, I think we'll still probably do that average amount, but we'll have the information sooner, and we can address that as we go forward if we see that there's some problems there. The second section of the ordinance addresses our refuse fund. And it's not that we needed to make any changes to the refuse fund, but that we just needed to update the ordinance to show the consumer price index adjustment there. And so that's not any big change. It's just an opportunity to update that part of the ordinance. Finally, then, the third section addresses the actual water service charges, plugs in again the base rates and the tiered structure. What is probably the most actually, there's one other thing that does on page 14 of the ordinance. There's been a discussion about discount for military users. And so we came up with a definition of who would receive discounts and in the military. And that is that any person or the person's spouse who is the owner of that account who is deployed to an area that's been designated as a combat zone would be entitled to a 50% reduction. That way we don't have to limit it to particular areas of the world that we know today are bad. It's whatever the President of the United States determines as a combat zone, then those people will receive that benefit. And so we tried to address that issue which was raised. And then the fourth section has to do with council intent. And the role of this was to do two things. First of all, there was discussion about the Weber Basin, the water we purchase from Weber Basin for the city, and that currently that's charged through the property tax system as opposed to being charged through the bills. And the council intent there indicates that's the council's desire is to continue to have that process work. If we hadn't done that, then the rate structure would be very different than what you saw today, at least as far as the amounts that would have to be collected. And the other items that addresses are, again, funding educational component, encouraging early replacement of the existing meters with new meters, and making sure that some of the funds that we're collecting through this modified ordinance are going to be expected to be used for repayment of whatever debt is ultimately issued in the next few years. And also that the council intends for sewer rates to be to cover a completion of a master plan in the next year.
Mark, can I just ask one question? I know it's our intent that, you know, with the Weber Basin, that we understand right now the tax is what works, but I'm just curious if we want wording in there that's saying that we want to explore the possibility of charging through the bills eventually. I mean, isn't that sort of the trend, and that's where it's going? So I'm just curious if we want to voice that.
That would be fine. My view of this, the reason I included this in this ordinance instead of in the other ordinance was I viewed this as focusing on these particular rates. And so I think every year when we look at this issue, and that's one of the policy goals in the joint resolution, is to kind of do an annual update. I think that would be the time that we could look at that.
Maybe that language would be more appropriate there, or you just think in the future it's
I just
something
think
to
in the
put
future that we would discuss that. You know, but if you wanted it, I could put something probably in this ordinance, since that's where we're addressing it, that says we'll continue to look at that in the future to determine if it's better to shift those rates.
Well, I think also that you've had the dialogue. I don't know that you've necessarily given direction as a council as to whether or not you want to consider that in the future. It is an issue, but it's a major change in how we would structure the rates. So you can continue to consider it. You'll just have to decide when you actually want to make the change. I guess that's the question.
And I guess I'm more interested in just keeping it on the radar that that's something that needs to be addressed someday. So
maybe it's more of an intent, not in an ordinance. I mean, we can talk about that.
I mean, it really kind of does make sense having that eventually switched over to the water utility, because it is something that is a function of the water utility.
Well, and I think it's the trend of a lot of cities to go in that direction. And
it just seems awkward putting it on people's property taxes. I think it creates confusion, and I don't think it truly, I don't think people really have a clear picture of what they're paying for water that way.
I think we can find a place to put that in here, and that won't be a substantive change that I don't think will cause any significant problems. It might actually end up in the preamble, but we'll find a place in here so that there's a recognition that that's a live issue.
Doesn't that essentially, though, raise that water, that 18% that goes into the general fund?
No, that's a different.
If it went into the water rate, doesn't it then get that percent scraped back out of it?
Yeah, that's the whole discussion that we would have when we decide to make that change. So certainly that would be, and that actually brings up the one point that is not addressed in any of the documents that I have prepared, and that is the fiscal charge from the utilities to the city, based on the understanding that that's going to be addressed in the budget process and not addressed in the rate setting process. And depending upon what you decide in the budget process, then that will flow forward into future years, rate ordinances. But that's not addressed in either of these documents, just because that there was no way to really address that since we don't know where we're going with that. Any other questions?
How in cement is this?
Well, for purposes of setting the public hearing, you are allowed to make modifications to the ordinance, just like with any ordinance. There is a problem if you wanted to raise rates because of notice. If you wanted to raise some of these numbers, that would potentially be problematic. If you brought some of those numbers down, it probably wouldn't be an issue, except it will require a complete reanalysis of the fiscal viability. The numbers that have been run would have to be recomputed to determine how that would affect, because every choice that you make will have the ripple effect somewhere of either not having enough revenue to meet the anticipated expenses, or to change what happens with other ratepayers. The
reason I say that, and just to telegraph kind of how I'm feeling about this, it still seems discriminatory to that 57% or 53% of our citizens that don't get secondary water. And some of the discussions we've had in the past were to go down to 3 tiers, which we've got 4 tiers for the non-secondary people. And so I think it's important that, I'm certain that there's going to be quite a few of those coming out on the 15th to talk about those things. And that's why I wanted to look at this and pencil some of these numbers that have been given to see how they really do stack up against one another, the secondaries versus the non-secondaries. I believe that there's a way to encourage conservation and still be fair with those two groups of people. But I don't think this does it. And so I would, if in my perfect world, those rates are going to change a little bit. Those numbers should change a little in order to come up with that fairness.
I will say that if you look at the current rate structure and the proposed rate structure does two things that the current rate structure doesn't do. First of all, it addresses the concern of during the winter months, is there an unreasonable difference in rates between people with and without secondary water? And it eliminates that issue that was out there before. And the other thing that it actually does, in the prior rate structure, whether by accident or on purpose because of some of the things that happened there, the highest tier of usage cost more if you didn't have outside water than if you did have outside water, which was a kind of a strange thing, because then people irrigating their lawns at the highest tier were paying more than people in the highest tier that did have irrigation water. This ordinance makes the highest tier the same level for both of those groups. And so I don't know if you want to call it unfairly discriminates or not. I mean, people without outside irrigation get to use up to 84,000 gallons of water at something less than the maximum tier. Once they hit that maximum tier, they pay the same rate as the maximum tier as people with outside water.
That does seem fair, because I think high 90% of our lots are going to be able to be watered with less than 84,000 gallons in a month.
You would be flooding your neighborhood with that much water.
Well, I've got a 9,000 square foot lot because I'm on a corner. I'm in an R18 with an extra couple of thousand feet because of the park strip that goes all the way around a corner lot, and I'm required to keep a drain. In August, I'm using about 76,000 gallons in an August, a really hot month. Now, over the last 5 years, from what I understand, the consideration has been to compensate or to account for the amount that people pay for their Pine View hookup or their Weber Basin hookup or whoever they've been getting their secondary from, which seems very discriminatory to those who are paying more for their outdoor water rate because they're helping these other people pay for their Pine View. Now, I don't know where that makes sense, really, but
all I can say about that is we determined, and I think based mostly on council input, although obviously anytime we took council input there were varying views on each of these items, that we couldn't really try to look at any individual outside other company that provided irrigation water, whether it's flood irrigation or Pine View or Weber Basin or whoever it was, partially because those numbers don't change, and even within those systems there are different amounts. And so all we could look at in coming up with a rate structure was to say, okay, given our need for cash, how can we spread this between these groups in the way that seems to accomplish the goals that we've talked about identifying? And when it came to addressing people with who don't have outside irrigation, the way to do that was to give them 2 additional tiers, so that a kind of a normal size lot would pay less, a slightly larger lot would pay a little bit more, and then once you got to that 84,000 gallons, you'd be paying the same rate. Whether those numbers are perfect or not, I mean, it's always up for debate, but that was, at least from the discussion that we had with you all and with the group, seemed to be the way to do it. The only way that I was aware that we would be able to get down to 3 tiers would have been if we had included a minimum amount of water in the base rate. So your base rate had included 4,000 or 5,000 gallons of water. You would have eliminated the first tier, not because that wasn't a tier, but just because it wouldn't show up on the bill as a separate tier. And then you'd have 3 tiers, but it would essentially be the same thing you're looking at today.
Or you could just put 2 and 3 together and call it 2.
Yeah, and not to argue, well, yeah, that's correct. You can
Go
do
ahead
that.
and argue. I don't care. It's all right.
If you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to make all the people who use less irrigation water pay more to compensate for the people who are using more.
I'm not suggesting that we take the rate from 3. I'm saying we take the rate from 2 and include it in 3.
Right, and if you did that, then again, you're going to have to flow that through somewhere.
That's why I say that I think this thing needs a little work.
Okay.
Well, there are costs. I mean, there are some real costs that we're incurring from making it so that people have cheap access to culinary water to dump freely on their lawns. I mean, we have to build the infrastructure. We have to maintain filter plants to do that. There are costs. It's not free.
There you have it. So you have 2 actions, I think, for action, items for action, and I think I'm done. Thanks.
Well, I mean, you encourage people to do that, we're going to have to build more capacity.
Mr. Chair, I think the suggestion is that you consider these 2 items in terms of setting the public hearing, and then if we could take a short break, maybe.
I was just going to ask.
I keep getting nods that that's needed or desired.
We're past the 2-hour mark by far, so we'll now, any further discussion on these 2 proposed ordinances and joint resolution?
There is no further discussion. I would propose that we set the public hearing on ordinance 2012-23 for May 15th.
I second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Stevens to set the public hearing for May 15th, 2012 for the proposed ordinance and the joint resolution. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
I think the motion was just for the ordinance.
Oh, for the first one?
Well, I'll add them together if we can, but
I think since they're listed separately, you ought to do them separately.
Okay, so the motion is for the proposed ordinance 2012-23 to set the public hearing for May 15th, 2012 from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Stevens. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
I would also make a motion that we accept the joint resolution for review on May 15th, 2012.
I'll second it. We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Vice Chair Blair to adopt the proposed joint resolution 2012-3 and to set the accept for review and final consideration on May 15th, 2012. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Thank you. We will now entertain taking just a short break, 5 minutes, and then come back. Thank you. We want to welcome you back from our short break, and this is the Ogden City Council meeting for May 1st, 2012, continuing. And now we will go to reports from the Planning Commission. Mr. Montgomery.
Well, these will be very short reports. The first item you have on the agenda is the report from the Planning Commission regarding the Water Master Plan. And just as a very quick background, back in 2000, 2002, when we did the general plan, Chapter 3 of the general plan talked about the public utilities, and Section 1 deals with water, Section 3 deals with stormwater, and set some very important goals and objectives we should be trying to meet. And so when the Planning Commission looked at the proposed Water Master Plan, they evaluated the actions being taken based on those policies. And as they looked at those policies, saw that many of those things that are addressed are being accomplished in this proposed Culinary Water Master Plan. All the things to try to protect our resources and our water resources that we have, improving this level of service. And as you've been involved in many different things throughout the years of the city, you've seen work to improve those. Now they're put it into this master plan, which gives a very definite way for that to happen. So as the Planning Commission looked at this, they felt that the proposal was consistent with the general plan, and in their role, that is what they need to find, and they recommended approval based on consistency to the general plan of the Water Master Plan. And was mentioned more detail about the aspects of it will be given another meeting But the Plan Commission report is, was this consistent with the general plan? And they found it was. Do you want to do the second item too, or do you want to vote on each one?
Let's do the second one.
Okay. So the second one, I could just replay what I said and just put stormwater, except for a couple of things. Back when the Planning Commission first talked about the stormwater plan and where are we with it because of CIP projects, the philosophy at that point was a different philosophy than what is shown in the proposed stormwater master plan. Back when the Planning Commission first raised this question, there was all this talk about stormwater detention ponds all throughout the city of massive size, and that we needed large locations. What the plan that went through the Planning Commission reviewed was the fact that even though some models may have shown that, years and years of actual rain have not. And so what the modeling had been showing for years, they reevaluated that and realized it's more the way the system is delivered rather than have detention ponds as the key element of that plan. And so a major change was made from years and years of what had been talked about taking place to what is in the actual stormwater master plan. And that is that a lot of the larger facilities that have been talked about really are not needed. What is needed is the upgrade in the delivery system, the piping, and those type of things, so that it can still handle the capacities. But a lot of extra land area to acquire new pond areas is not needed. This is important because in the Mount Lewis Community Plan, one of the things that came out, Mount Lewis really has a lot of small detention ponds throughout the community that are eyesores. And as the Planning Commission looked at this, one of the things they asked to be looked at in future plans, and is actually now being studied, is all the individual stormwater ponds, how are they really being used, and how can they be more of a multi-function usage in the future? And those things are being assessed. And that was one of the recommendations of the Planning Commission, is to look at those type of things in the future and their design criteria, and that they can be assets to the neighborhood. And then the other part of it is, with the change of how we look at stormwater, one of the key things is what's the quality of that water when it's discharged into the river? And one of the key things is that shift that we need to have better water quality that takes place when stormwater is finally discharged into the river. And so one of the items also talked about by the Planning Commission is that in that management plan, that those outfall locations be strategically placed so that they can, again, improve the water quality that is discharged into the river. Because that is kind of the whole system. When you look at from start to finish of stormwater, that is the end place where it goes. And the key is to always have that, improve the water quality. And there's many ways to do that in those outlet facilities that can improve that water quality. So in the Planning Commission's recommendation on this, again, they found it was consistent with the general plan and all the aspects of the general plan talks about. And they made those two additional recommendations of future amendments addressing the existing detention facilities and how they are designed and maintained, and also that that storm management plan identify future outfall locations. And there's a difference between I should make a quick thing, from the master plan to the management plan. The management plan is something that public services always has to look at and improve. It is not the master plan, but it's something the state requires them to do as a separate item of how they keep upgrading to meet those water quality standards. And so that is just something the Planning Commission recommended, that they always look at that type of thing too, which is basically mandated that they do that, but they added that as a recommendation. So again, the recommendation on that was also that it was consistent with the general plan.
Any questions for Mr. Montgomery?
I do have a question. You mentioned the several small detention ponds in our areas of our community that has it been determined that those are not needed, so since they don't really function?
Now, that type of analysis didn't take place in the master plan. Those are some things we're looking at in the future and some other studies to see, are they all functioning? Do they all need to be the way they are? Can we make some improvements, or do we need all?
That's to be determined.
That's to be determined.
The management plan, is that generated by the master plan? Because it probably refers back to the master plan in some way.
You know, Mr. Anderson could address that part of the management plan better than I could, because he's the one responsible for it.
Chair and other members of the council, the management plan is different in the fact that the management plan coincides with our MS4 permit. It's a sort of a living document that we have to update continually as things, like in the news the other day, you noticed a spill in the Ogden River. There was some substance. So the management plan, we have protocol set in place how to deal with that. That takes into account. So it's really a living document that we use every day in our function, where the management plan is a tool that we use on how to deal with capital improvement projects and other deficiencies in the system.
I think he meant the master plan.
Master plan.
Master plan, yeah.
Started with management.
Yeah, the master plan.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Further discussion?
If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion to adopt proposed resolution 2012-10, which will set the public hearing for May 15th, 2012.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Huser to adopt proposed resolution 2012-10. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't catch you in time. You really are not adopting.
We're just setting the public hearing.
Setting the public hearing. So I would suggest that you amend your motions to just set the public hearing.
So moved.
Okay. So we have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Huser to actually set the public hearing for May 15th, 2012 for proposed resolution 2012-10. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
I will make a motion that we set the public hearing for May 15th, 2012 to discuss this storm drain master plan, which is proposed resolution 2012-11.
I'll second it.
I have a motion from Councilmember Wicks and a second from Councilmember Heyer to set the public hearing for May 15th, 2012 for proposed resolution 2012-11 addressing the storm drain master plan. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Well, that sets the public hearing. Next on the agenda is new business. This is the capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2013 through 2017. Ms. Janine Eller-Smith.
Last the best of all the game. So I'm also going to be fairly brief. I just have 9 slides, but before I start, I want to just kind of review the process that we've gone through on the capital improvement plan. As you know, the first administration reviews their projects that they would like to propose, and then they make the presentation to the council in the form of hard copy. Ends up looking like this. This year, because we had a change in administration and a new mayor, we got this a little bit late because they wanted the opportunity for Mayor Caldwell to have some comments on the plan. Once we receive it, the council reviews projects with the department heads, and then we rank. You've ranked the general fund projects in terms of your priorities, and also the community plan projects in terms of your priorities. And then we'll generally, after going through the process, if there's additions or changes that council wants to make, we make those prior to adopting the CIP. Because of the amount of time we've spent on the utility rates, we haven't had a lot of discussion about adding or subtracting projects, but we can certainly have that. You still have that opportunity, and maybe once we've gone through what we're actually proposing in terms of the changes, you'll feel comfortable. Just for citizens, whoops, how do I push this? There we go. just to remind everyone what a CIP project is. Generally, there's three main projects: repair, maintenance, and existence of existing facilities, additions or renovations to existing facilities, or new construction, anything over $30,000. We have several objectives when we're doing these CIPs. Primarily one, to determine a long-range financing plan for these projects. And in this case, we've really spent a lot of time trying to, well, it's also provide information for the utility rate determination, because a lot of these CIP projects are linked to the utility rate, as Cody's presentation showed. We've taken a lot of time to try and align the master plans that we've had completed with the CIP. Unfortunately, because a lot of initially the plans, master plans, and the CIP were sort of happening at the same time, the administration didn't get that opportunity to kind of make those alignments. And so we've taken this opportunity as we've gone through this rate study process to make that alignment. The one change we have made is from the master plan recommendations is, in some cases, we've spread the costs of those projects over a longer period of time than was initially recommended. So basically, for the stormwater utility projects, we're adding 5 projects and we're amending 2 projects, deleting 2 projects. The recommendations, if you're interested in your packet, are on page 352. All of this is kind of to just bring in line the projects that were proposed in the CIP to make changes. Of those, all of the changes in the stormwater utility, there's only 2 recommended for funding in FY13. And that's the 5 Points water diversion, which is for $303,000, and the Harrison to Monroe for $730,000. Both of those projects are high on the list, are considered A projects in the Storm Sewer Master Plan. And I'm only talking about the funding for the FY13 because we know it all depends. Every year when we review the CIP, it just comes down to how much money we have. And after hearing Mr. Johnson's dreary report, we know that there's not lots of money this year. On the water utility projects, we're just adding 1 project, and in fact, the adding is just because we split the Wheeler Creek out from the filter plant, so that's the new project. We're amending 4 projects to kind of better describe the projects that are there. And we're deleting 6 projects. 2 of the projects are not really CIP projects, and so we agreed with legal that those shouldn't be in the plan because they just don't qualify as CIP projects. 2 are already being completed with the remaining of current bond funds, with some money that they had left over. So that's why we're taking out those 2 projects. And then the other 2 projects are just wrapped up into 1 mega project. And so that's why those are being deleted. So for funding in FY13, it's proposed the Canyon Line Pipeline project for $5 million. And just to reiterate that it's assumed that we will have a $4 million project in the current year, FY12. If for some reason we can't go forward in the FY12, because right now at this point we only have 60 days, then that would actually probably end up being a $9 million project in FY13, or I suppose it's possible that they could go to 13 and 14, depending on how they think they can spend the money, how fast they can spend the money. Then meter replacements, that's been in there for several years. It's just kind of an ongoing process as the water utility tries to replace the old meters with the new updated meters, $600,000. And then distribution and fire flow. This is sort of the mega project that kind of combines all of the distribution, fire flow, and pressure projects into one project. And although the master plan recommended, I think, $2.5 million per year funding, this is recommending about $1.9 million. So when we get to general fund priorities, I just included the council's top 3 as ranked. The Union Station boiler replacement, $252,000, that's half of the total project. They will recommend another $250,000 in FY14. The land purchase for station number 3, which Mr. Johnson talked about, and then Lauren Farr Pavilion as well. I did note I didn't get a very good look at the list of CIP projects that the administration is presenting in the budget, but I did note that their number 1 item was for downtown parking for $300,000, and actually downtown parking came out dead last in the council's ranking. Just a review. Community plans. This is where we spent some time discussing last year, a little more time about what kinds of projects we'd want to include in the CIP. However, taking that direction, the administration has included a project for Bonneville Park improvements for $60,000. And then of the 11 total projects that, number 1 projects from the community plans, and there's 11 because some of them had 2, they tied for first place. 4 of those are sidewalk projects. And in the EN4 project number, they're recommending about over $500,000 in various sidewalk projects. So I think, that addresses some of the council's concerns, but if there's other projects that you'd like to see included, we can certainly add those in on the 15th if you think that's important. Sanitary sewer, I just make a comment, because we don't have a master plan, there's sort of minimal funding in there, just to kind of maintenance and upkeep of $300,000. So again, tonight the action is to set a public hearing for May 15th. This is not legally required for the CIP, but because of its tie-in to the master plans and the utility rate study, we're recommending that we also hold a public hearing on this as well. It'll be sort of the mega public hearing on the 15th. So if there's any questions or...
I had a question, but maybe it's better on the 15th, but maybe I'll ask it just in case. The meter replacement, the 606, now, if I remember right, engineering suggested that it was going to take $2 million to replace the remaining non-nifty meters. What do you call it? And so is that what their plan is at this point, is just to continue with this?
Well, the 600 is what is in the CIP right now. Whether they change that or not, and we've had some discussions about whether or not it's appropriate to use bond funds to replace meters where, you may have a 20-year payout for a 20-year piece of equipment that only has a life expectancy of 20 years. So I'm not sure what next year they'll recommend. We understand that there's more money needed for meter replacements. But the current CIP just shows that $600,000.
I see.
Now, in the budget, it may recommend more. I didn't, we'll have to
so that's what
review
this goes, because it seems to me that based on the information we've been given, that the new meters actually read more accurately and actually report the correct amount of flow and can detect leaks, etc., and that can be read in the snow and all those things that would allow averaging of people's bill. But some of those things that seem like they might be pretty important. And in essence, if my bill's any indication, it'll pay for itself in not very many years because of the increased, my bill went up because my water is being metered accurately. And I suspect that's probably the case across the board.
Is anybody from administration or Glenn, is there any other, am I restating what we've sort of?
Well, I believe, just a quick comment, I believe the total need is more than $2 million. Maybe someone can clarify. I think it's three, approximately.
Closer to 3.1.
Well, my memory's good, but it's kind of short.
It was 3.
Yeah, it was just over, I believe, $3 million.
Justin, have we not used bond money in other years for meter replacements?
Bond money was used, and if you remember a couple years ago, due to some of the savings we've had on projects, we used bond money to pay for upgrades to meters. And just to clarify,
Because it was an easy way to spend the money.
correct. Yes, it was.
Because it was a quick way to spend the money that we had to get spent.
Had to spend, yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, and to clarify, we might need to get with you because there was some discussion over there because I believe we had changed it to be over 2 years, $1.5 million to the meters. So that information may not have properly been given to you.
So I guess if council wants to give input now, we can make that change prior to
Great
next
suggestion.
week so that you have some other, an amendment that you can make.
I think if we do it over a
Years for
2-year
one.
period, it's very functional for us to
Years,
do
about
that.
a little over $1.5 million. Okay.
Right.
Any other?
So, Mr. Chair, I think in order to set the public hearing, though, you'd have to amend that tonight, not next week, or not in 2 weeks, because that's an increase. Does Mr. Stratford agree with that?
I mean, I get the public hearing is not legally required, so we are
setting a public hearing.
a public hearing. So we can certainly make that amendment tonight, and we can make the change in the document if you want to do that.
So that would be just changing WU 096 from 606,000 to 1.5 million?
1.5 million.
Okay.
Kind of lines up with our previous discussions about getting to the equal pay plan
as soon
and
as we can.
accuracy and year-round reading and all that, so.
I would think if you include that in your motion, that will take care of the issue for noticing.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Further discussion?
No, Mr. Chair, if I might make this motion then, concerning the proposed ordinance 2012-22, amending the proposal WU096 from 606,000 to 1.5 million, I move that we set the public hearing for that on May 15th, 2012.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Heyer and a second from Councilmember Gochner with the amendment to set the public hearing for May 15th, 2012. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll set the public hearing for May 15th. Next on the agenda is public comments. This is an opportunity to address the council regarding your concerns or ideas. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. In this form of government, all city personnel are the responsibility of the administration, not of the council. Please discuss any concerns you may have regarding staff with the mayor, chief administrative officer, or department directors. Timer.
Good evening, council members. I'll make this very brief. My name is Jesse Straub. As a citizen of Ogden and as a member of Ogdenites, OSI, Ogdenites in Search for Information, we're a nonprofit organization. Yeah, concerning the annual action plan for proposed resolution 2012-2017, I would like to know more information about the grants that are available for housing, and not just for me, but for the community of Ogden. How many grants for housing are available? How are they being distributed? And what is the next step for us to do if we are qualified? So would someone in the Community Development Department or HUD let me and the community know what are we to do next? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dan Schroeder, 1444 Binford Street, and I have some nice graphs to show you on the effects of the proposed water rate increase. There we go. Oh, slight delay. This graph summarizes some of the data that's actually in the consultant's report, but they presented it as just a great big table of numbers, and I'm a more visual person, so I thought I'd plot it all up. I want to start by pointing out, and the graph shows the percentage by which various users' rates would increase, or in some cases decrease under this proposal. I want to emphasize that I'm not cherry picking just a few users in order to highlight some particular point I want to make. This shows the full range from people who use 100 gallons all the way up to 1 million gallons. So all the information is here. I should also point out that I'm not diluting the effect by mixing in the rates for sewer and garbage and storm drain, which aren't changing very much. And of course, any change in water looks smaller when you put all that other stuff in the denominator. Notice that the scale on the graph from left to right is gallons used per month, and the scale gets more and more compressed as you go to the right. So the grid lines, for instance, are 100, 200, 300, 400, getting closer and closer together up to 1,000. And then it goes by thousands, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, all the way up to 10,000. And then it goes by 10,000s all the way up to 100,000 and so on. And then on the vertical axis is the percentage change. I've put a slightly heavier line at the 7.8% nominal average change, which is how much on average the revenue is supposed to increase. So the people who are above that line, I would say, are losers. Their rates are increasing by more than average. And then the people below the line are winners. They're increasing by less than average. Looking in a little more detail, at the far left we have the change in the base rate, which is about 17% for those with the smaller connections, or about 19.5% for those with 1-inch connections. Those are people who aren't using any water at all, and there are quite a few such bills sent every month. Then to the right, most of the users are in the range of a few thousand gallons up to about 10,000 gallons. Well over half, I would say, of all the water bills fall in that range. And those people also are generally seeing their rates increase by, well, they're all above the nominal 7.8%, and many of them are in the 15 to 20% range. Don't pay too much attention to those two big spikes. As Mr. Stratford partially pointed out, those are fixing errors in the old rate system where some people were getting discounts for no good reason. Now, the big winners are the big lawn waterers. Mr. Heyer, I hope you're happy with this. Those are the people who use a lot of water on their lawns in the summer. Although there's not as many of them as you might think. I just checked, and during the month of August, which I guess is the hottest month, only about 10% of those without secondary water are actually using more than 42,000 gallons, and only about 2%, and I'm out of time already. I'll just go to the very end. I really don't know what the rational basis is for decreasing rates for people who are using hundreds of thousand gallons per month. I have a similar graph for commercial users, which you can look at your leisure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schroeder. And Amy will have that information for us to look at. Thank you. Further public comments? Comments from administration?
None tonight, thank you.
Council staff?
Nothing, thanks.
And council members?
I just had one quick comment. It was Arbor Day last Friday, and our city arborist, Monty Stewart, and Jay Louder, and everybody I think was involved, but they planted 25 trees at Mount Ogden Park, and it's well worth taking a drive to see what happened, because they introduced a whole bunch of new varieties, and it was pretty exciting to see that. So thank you.
One of the things I think is really coming along quite well is the water project, the down on Grant, and isn't it Grant? Grant, and yeah. It's just an amazing feature, and I think when everybody gets and looks at it and gets to the refined part of it where you can actually look down on it and see the symbols and whatever's on it, it's just going to be a great addition to the water, to our river project.
I have just a few really quick ones, just to invite everybody who can to, if they'd like to join Marshall White Center for the Cinco de Mayo celebration this Saturday. We'd love to have people come down and be a part of that. And May 10th is our citywide Make a Difference Day. We want to just mention that so people can get that on their calendars. And then just a brief thing that was Mr. Stevens' comment earlier about homelessness. I just wanted to touch on that just very quickly. Chronic homelessness is down across the state, but temporary or periodic homelessness is up. And the biggest increase, too, is in families. And we've seen an increase of 19% of families are homeless. But 80% of the county's low-income households are currently within Ogden City's boundaries. And so we do have a great responsibility to help with this temporary or periodic homelessness, and I just wanted to make that as part of the comment from earlier. Any other comments?
Maybe just a question. Will somebody address the gentleman's questions on housing? Mr.
Yes, if you'll see me after, I'll give him a phone number, and we will get him in touch with the right person. And I should have mentioned that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember to adjourn from Councilmember Heyer. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. This is a reminder that we still have a council work session to be held following this meeting, and the purpose of the work session is to discuss the parade ordinance, donations policy, capital improvement plan, amendment, and budget openings regarding pickleball and council business.